Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Taylor Wright. Taylor Wright was born on April 23, 1988. Friends and family described her as energetic and full of life. She was kind and empathetic, spending most of her life in North Carolina as she pursued her American dream. Taylor married Jeff Wright and later had a son named Drake. She earned a college degree and worked as an officer at the local police station, where she solved numerous crimes and was respected. To the outside world, Taylor's life seemed perfect. She had a loving husband, a son, and a respected job. However, the reality was that not everything in her life was as idyllic as it appeared. Taylor's close friends knew that she smoked marijuana occasionally, but she kept it a secret. During her time in the police force, she used it to manage stress and her heavy workload. She claimed that she didn't smoke regularly, only occasionally to relax after a long day. However, Jeff found out about her secret and left with her son after their divorce. This made Taylor realize that she needed to change her life. In 2016, Taylor decided to start over and moved to Pensacola, Florida, a small resort town with a population of about 52,000. She likes the warm, comfortable atmosphere here. After quitting her job, she began working as a private investigator. Armed with the knowledge and experience from her previous job, she was eager to apply her skills to help her clients. Taylor divorced her husband, but faced two major challenges: child custody and financial issues. Court proceedings to divide assets and child custody were ongoing. It was a complicated divorce, and despite her efforts to reach an agreement, they were unable to reach an agreement, which dragged on. In September 2017, frustrated by financial disputes, Taylor withdrew money from her bank account without telling Jeff. The money, which was her personal savings, was something she did not want to share with Jeff. After withdrawing the money, she gave it to a friend to keep. One of Taylor's friends, Ashley MacArthur, is the main character in this story. Taylor has known Ashley, a forensic scientist, for over a year. Although it was a relatively short period of time, they became very close, to the point where Taylor entrusted Ashley with a large sum of money. Ashley agreed to help and was supposed to deposit the money in a safe deposit box, keeping it a secret from Jeff until Taylor was ready to use it. However, she soon needed money to pay for a lawyer. When Taylor reached out to Ashley, she noticed that Ashley always had excuses for delaying the return of the money or only giving her small amounts. Ashley claimed she was having trouble withdrawing the funds or that there were issues with the bank. During this time, Taylor grew increasingly suspicious that something was wrong and worried that her money might have been spent. Despite Taylor's persistent requests for the full amount to be returned, Ashley continued to provide various excuses. On the evening of September 7, 2017, Taylor and her friend Cassandra Waller went out to dinner. Cassandra had quickly become close friends after Taylor moved to the area. Cassandra was new to the city and Taylor suggested they rent an apartment together. Cassandra, a kind teacher, agreed. Over time, they developed a strong friendship. During dinner, Taylor shared her financial concerns, especially about her friend Ashley, who she believed was intentionally delaying repayment of money. Taylor expressed concern that Ashley might have spent the money or not want to pay it back. This made Taylor very anxious and stressed because she desperately needed the money to hire a good lawyer. That evening, Cassandra comforted Taylor, reassuring her that the matter would eventually be resolved, although she also had doubts about whether the money was still there. Taylor mentioned that she had scheduled a meeting with Ashley the next day, September 8th, to go to the bank together. On the morning of September 8th, as Cassandra was getting ready for work, she said goodbye to Taylor. And on her way out of the house, she saw Ashley's sitting car in the driveway. They were finally ready to take care of their banking issues. The girls said goodbye, and Cassandra drove off to school. Later that day, Ashley called Cassandra to inform her that she and Taylor had decided not to go to the bank, opting instead to go to the farm. This confused Cassandra, as she knew Taylor was in dire need of money. The night before, Taylor had been very stressed and emotional at dinner, eager to get her financial situation sorted out. Ashley explained that she and Taylor had been discussing Taylor's struggles. Ashley suggested that horseback riding might help Taylor improve spirit, therefore them to cancel their bank trip and plan an alternative vacation. This explanation seemed strange to Cassandra, but she wished them luck anyway. However, after the call, Cassandra attempted to contact Taylor but received no response to her calls or messages. Later on, Cassandra received a text from Taylor, who said she couldn't talk at the moment but would call back later. Taylor explained that she was feeling uncertain and depressed due to her divorce and the changes in her life, and that she was going out of town for a few days. Cassandra believed her and decided to give her friend some space. A couple of days later, Cassandra reached out again, asking Taylor to return home as soon as she could. After that, she received no response. As the days passed, Cassandra tried to contact Taylor several times, but Taylor continued to ignore her calls and texts, even though some of the messages were marked as read. Taylor did not return home, and all of her belongings were still intact, which made Cassandra increasingly worried about her friend's safety. Cassandra wanted to see Taylor to make sure she was okay. Their neighbor said that Taylor had used drugs in the past and that she could become withdrawn during difficult times. With the difficulties Taylor was having, Cassandra was worried that she might relapse. Cassandra was feeling anxious. A week had gone by with no news, and waiting seemed pointless. Concerned, her reached out to the police. She told the officers that something was off, as Taylor was behaving unusually and had completely disappeared without explanation. In their shared apartment, there were numerous personal items belonging to Taylor that she would have taken if she had moved. There was no valid reason for her to ignore her friend's calls. Until now, Taylor had never done anything like this. After hearing Cassandra's story, the police took note of the unusual aspects of the case. The police focused on the time frame of her disappearance. Naturally, they interviewed Cassandra first, since she lived in the same house as Taylor and had a close relationship with her. Meanwhile, searches were conducted in the apartment that Cassandra shared with Taylor. In the apartment, the police found Taylor's identification, some cash, and an unloaded revolver. Cassandra explained that they kept weapons in the house for self-defense, but they had never used them. There was nothing else suspicious found, but it was evident that Taylor could not have left for an extended period without her documents, money, and belongings. Cassandra was questioned several times, and she quickly felt that the police suspected her and shifted their focus to proving her innocence. Despite this, she continued to cooperate with the investigation because she wanted to find out the truth. Eventually, she was ruled out as a suspect. Police initially focused on Jeff, given their contentious divorce, which involved the division of assets and custody of their son. Jeff certainly had a strong motive to harm Taylor, but police quickly determined that he was in North Carolina at the time of her disappearance and had not left the city. He had recently remarried and was focused on building a new life, with little regard for his ex-wife. Family members confirmed that despite their divorce, Jeff and Taylor remained on good terms for the sake of their 6-year-old son. Jeff was known to be non-confrontational and had never harmed Taylor. He was not even aware that she had withdrawn money and tried to conceal it. Therefore, there was no reason for him to be angry with her, prompting police to immediately eliminate him as a potential suspect. The police then decide to talk to Ashley, whom Cassandra had mentioned. Her behavior is very unusual. They bring her in for questioning, and the police quickly notice that she is even flirting with the police, which shows that she is not at all concerned about her friend's disappearance. Ashley seems to believe that Taylor is okay. She knows that Taylor has been addicted to marijuana in the past and thinks that Taylor is not really missing but is simply indulging her addiction. Ashley speculates that after receiving some money, Taylor relapsed and went off to use. However, this explanation seems unconvincing because Ashley had previously told Cassandra about the trip to the farm, but she didn't mention that. Only when the police press her does Ashley reveal that they went to the farm because Taylor wanted to relax. During the trip, Taylor confided in her about the stress she was under from the divorce proceedings, which had affected her mental health. After some time, Taylor expressed that she was tired and wanted to go home. She called an Uber and left. Ashley reported that she hadn't seen or heard from Taylor, despite making several attempts to call her. The police were aware of a money issue that Ashley was supposed to resolve but was avoiding, leading them to suspect she was hiding something. Suddenly, Ashley started mentioning a safe deposit box and money, claiming she had no knowledge of the funds being talked about. At this point, the police were confused as there was no clear information regarding the money. Police then decided to look into text messages between her and Taylor. They discovered numerous discussions about money, with Ashley frequently postponing meetings and transferring money. In the text messages, they talked about going to the bank on September 8th to withdraw money. Police requested footage from cameras near Taylor's home. After reviewing the videos, they found the women near Taylor's apartment, which matched Cassandra's earlier account. Ashley was in a car in front of the house when Cassandra left. Taylor then left the house and left with Ashley. Using geolocation, police tracked Taylor and Ashley's movements. Police reviewed surveillance footage from across the city and saw them buying beer and food, which appeared to be normal. However, no further information about their whereabouts was available after that. Inconsistencies began to appear between Ashley's testimony. However, the police decided to release her because they did not have enough evidence against her at that time. After that, Ashley contacted the police station almost daily to check on the progress of the investigation and to see if they had any new information. She wanted to help and often recounted the details of that day, as well as places where Taylor might have gone. During the conversation, she suggested that police should search alleys and talk to people who are selling illegal substances. She believed that Taylor was simply depressed and using drugs uncontrollably, and she repeatedly urged the police to follow up on this lead. She also talked about some suspicious suspects that she had seen with Taylor. Despite Ashley's best efforts to appear concerned, but police are still investigating her connection to Taylor's disappearance. Video evidence shows that Ashley visited the bank after Taylor went missing. During that visit, she withdrew money from Taylor's card. Police are particularly concerned about any potential conflict between Ashley and Taylor. Ashley had a strong motive for her actions, the $34,000 in question. It is suspected that she deliberately delayed her response because she did not want to return the money. Fearing that Taylor might report this to the police, Ashley may have decided to eliminate her friend. With Taylor missing for such a long time, there are concerns that she is no longer alive, but this needs to be confirmed. Ashley had a significant advantage. She worked for the police department and was married to a former deputy chief of the Battery Falcons. This created a difficult situation for the officers, who could not be sure of their safety while investigating her. As a result, they chose to keep the investigation secret. In October, Ashley was called in for questioning again. As the case progressed, documentary and circumstantial evidence accumulated that linked her to Taylor's disappearance. The police noticed a marked change in Ashley's behavior. She went from being outgoing and flirtatious to being withdrawn and clearly anxious. By this time, the police had verified that most of her previous statements were lies. They presented her with clear contradictions in her testimony and began investigating the cashing of hidden checks, which were likely to have forged signatures. At the very least, this could lead to accusations of fraud, but there could be darker motives behind these actions. Ashley initially claimed that she and Taylor had gone to East Milton, where they allegedly spent the day at a farm with animals. They were last seen on surveillance footage at 11:45 a.m., which was the only footage of Taylor alive during her initial interview. She was recorded on surveillance cameras in various locations throughout the day, but she was seen alone. As the police continued to talk to Ashley, she became increasingly nervous. Her answers became more confused, and she struggled to explain the discrepancies in her story. The police obtained a search warrant for the farmhouse but found no evidence in the large area. They then asked about the checks to determine if they were indeed counterfeit. If the checks were genuine, that would mean that Taylor was still alive when Ashley went to the bank, but Ashley could not give a clear answer. She just said that the checks could be real. While examining the geolocation data on Ashley's cell phone, police discovered that she had been staying at Britt Road for an extended period of time. This was another farm owned by her family. In fact, they had been there for several hours before Taylor disappeared. Ashley again confirmed that Taylor was going to buy a truck from a dealership. But this time, she added new details to the story. She said that Taylor was going back to the farm. Ashley had not mentioned these details in her earlier statements, claiming that Taylor had asked her to keep the incident private. Ashley believed that Taylor was still alive and would come back, so she did not want to harm her reputation in front of the police. However, she lied multiple times, leading the police to lose trust in her. The police were very interested in the Ashley family farm in Britt Road. It was a large, isolated area that would have been a fit place to commit the crime and cover it up. During their questioning, the police noted another strange aspect of Ashley's behavior: why she did not contact the police immediately when Taylor promised to return but did not show up. It was clear that Taylor was in trouble and needed help. Although Ashley tried to show concern to the police, she made no effort to find Taylor. Why did she wait until she was called in for questioning to show concern? These questions remain unanswered, but the police believe that Ashley was withholding important information. After her trip to the farm with Taylor, Ashley frequently called the police station to check on the investigation into her friend's disappearance, especially after her initial interview. She was anxious to know if she was being considered a suspect. After her conversation with the police, Ashley realized that she was the prime suspect in the case. She decided to ask for a lawyer, which ended her visit to the police station. On the morning of October 19, 2017, Ashley returned home. That afternoon, police obtained a search warrant for the farm where she and Taylor had been staying. Specially trained dogs were deployed in the search, and within 2 hours, they discovered a suspicious burial site. It was a small pit that appeared to have been recently dug and had been covered with concrete. A human skull was found in a shallow grave, along with other remains that had been hastily buried in the dirt and construction debris. The victim died from a gunshot wound to the head. Due to the advanced state of decomposition, the body could not be identified at the scene. However, based on clothing and jewelry, it is believed that it was Taylor. An autopsy confirmed that the body was Taylor Wright, 30. The identification was completed using dental records and DNA analysis. Ashley was arrested that evening, October 19, 2018, and charged with premeditated murder. Ashley's defense attorney believed in her innocence, but the abundance of circumstantial evidence made it challenging to convince the jury of her non-involvement in the crime. The attorney focused on Ashley's psychological profile, portraying her as sweet, pretty, and a police officer, which seemed inconsistent with being a violent criminal. Friends and family described Ashley as quiet, modest, and incapable of murder, especially when considering her physical attributes. In contrast, Taylor was physically stronger, leading the prosecution to question the defense's arguments. The lawyer developed his strategy based on the fact that the police lacked direct evidence to prove Ashley's guilt. There was no murder weapon, no witnesses, and no DNA linking Ashley to the body. This made it difficult for the prosecutor's office to connect Ashley to the crime. One witness was the victim's ex-husband, Jeff. He stated that he reached out to Ashley a few days after his Taylor went missing, trying to locate her to address some matters related to their marriage and divorce. Jeff contacted Ashley via social media. She claimed that the last time she saw Taylor was when she was exchanging money. She expressed concern about whether Taylor had arrived safely. This was a new detail that Ashley had never mentioned before, leading the police to realize that she was a pathological liar who had deceived everyone around her. Although Jeff was initially investigated and cleared as a suspect due to a solid alibi, he still had a strong motive. The lawyer attempted to redirect the jury's attention to Jeff's possible involvement in his ex-wife's murder. But these efforts were unsuccessful. The testimonies from Ashley's close friends greatly influenced the jury. They revealed that the Ashley was not as she seemed. She frequently visited a strip club. Bartenders and staff stated that just before Taylor went missing, Ashley spoke negatively about Taylor. Later, a gun associated with Taylor's death was discovered in Ashley's house. After new evidence emerged, the Ashley admitted to spiking Taylor's beer with a strong substance. However, when Taylor took a sip, she noticed the drink tasted odd and clearly spoiled. She spat it out and refused to drink any more, which likely led to the failure of Ashley's poisoning plan. Despite this admission, Ashley denied any involvement in the shooting of her friend. The prosecution argued that she had a strong motive. Ashley was holding on to a large sum of Taylor's money and was delaying returning it. Taylor desperately needed the money to pay her lawyer, so if Ashley delayed paying, Taylor would likely report the matter to the police. This situation gave Ashley a motive to get rid of her friend. The police later discovered the reason for the delay in returning the money. Ashley had been secretly having an affair with a man named Brandon, without her husband's knowledge. It was revealed that she had spent all of the money on Brandon, including giving him a motorcycle just weeks before Taylor went missing. This coincided with the time she had received money from Taylor. In court, Brandon admitted that Ashley had frequently given him expensive gifts, but he did not know where she got the money, as she had no other source for such a large sum of money. The police tracked Ashley's movements and discovered that she had gone to Home Depot after Taylor went missing. The police spoke to a sales clerk who confirmed that Ashley had purchased several bags of quick-drying solution. When the substance found in Taylor's grave was tested, it matched the quick-drying compound mentioned by the hardware store employee. This suggests that Ashley attempted to quickly hide Taylor's body on the farm to avoid detection. However, Ashley's attorney argued that she was not physically able to carry the heavy bags, dig the grave, and move Taylor's body. The jury then deliberated for about 4 hours and found Ashley MacArthur guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, eligible for parole after 25 years. She also served an additional 7 years for fraud related to Taylor Wright's finances. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Ronald Platt. On July 28, 1996, in South England, Captain John Kopek and his son prepared for a day of fishing on their Brixham trawler, Mulcahy. After an unproductive day, they decided to venture further into an area known as the Roughs. They lowered their net into the water and waited. Soon, they felt the familiar pull of a heavy catch. John thought they had caught a big fish and decided to bring the net back to the surface. However, it wasn't a fish. John and his son were shocked and a dead body fell onto their deck. John quickly notified the Brixham Coast Guard. The body was badly decomposed, indicating it had been in the ocean for a while. Although fish had nibbled on it, the man was dressed neatly in a long-sleeved shirt, corduroy pants, and brown shoes. The police observed that his pockets were emptied, and he had no identification. The only distinguishing features were a badly smudged tattoo on his right hand and a Rolex watch on his wrist. The body was transferred to the medical examiner's office in Devon. It was estimated that the man was between 40 and 50 years old. The tattoo looked like a group of stars. The only serious injury was on his head. It was not fatal and, along with other bruises, appeared to be consistent with having been dragged along the seabed before being brought onto the boat. His lungs were filled with water. It was determined that he died from drowning, something common in the area given that the English Channel is right off the coast. The police suspected he might have fallen overboard during one of the ferry crossings. The only other way to identify him was through dental records. If he was a British citizen, his records would be available, so the examiner proceeded with this method. However, it would take some time. By chance, a mortuary technician noticed the man's watch. It was a Rolex Oyster self-winding watch, fully waterproof and needing motion to stay active for 48 hours. They could trace the ownership if it was genuine. By examining the watch, the investigators could determine that the man drowned on July 20, 1996, because the calendar feature showed the date as July 22. They also found a serial number hidden between the strap and the watch face. This number was sent to Rolex to check if the watch was authentic and if it had been serviced by the owner. Several weeks later, investigators identified him as Ronald Joseph Platt through Rolex records. The medical examiner confirmed this with dental records. Ronald Joseph Platt was a 51-year-old TV repairman. Records show he was born in Calgary, Canada, in 1945 before his family relocated to Britain. Ronald was unmarried and had previously served as a soldier in the British Army for his national service. Close friends described him as a quiet, introverted man. He loves his native Canada very much. He is also passionate about electronics and precision engineering, which led him to purchase a Rolex in Germany in 1967. It became one of his most treasured possessions. And his ex-partners noted that he would not even remove his watch to shower. With this information, investigators needed to determine Ronald how he ended up entangled in a fishing trawler. Detective Constable Ian Clenahan from the Devon and Cornwall Police was assigned to the case right from the start. Police discovered that Ronald's last known address was in Essex, far from where his body was found. Clenahan contacted the Essex Police Department for further investigation. Inspector Peter Redmond offered to go to the address to help investigate the case. When Peter visited, the house was empty. He contacted the owner, who explained that the previous occupant had moved out some time ago, but provided the detective with a reference letter. The letter contained the forwarding address and contact number for someone named David Davis. Upon calling the provided number, Peter was able to reach David. The detective inquired about the relationship between Ronald and David before explaining that the body they discovered in Devon was possibly that of his friend. David agreed to visit the Essex police. Peter met with him and found he to be friendly and confident. However, David was quiet and didn't ask many questions about Ronald's death or how it was discovered. When asked, David mentioned that he and Ronald had been friends for several years. He told Peter that he hadn't seen Ronald in over 3 months. The last time they met, he had lent Ronald money to start an electrical business in France. David believed that Ronald had been living in France all this time. During the interview, Peter discovered that the tattoo on Ronald's hand was a maple leaf, the national symbol of Canada. David explained Ronald's affection for Canada. After sharing all the information he had, he left the station, promising to send Detective Peter a photo of Ronald. A few days later, Peter received the photo as promised. The Essex police had been able to conclude the investigation, arriving at the theory that Ronald had fallen overboard and drowned in the canal. This matched the story told by David. It had simply been an unfortunate accident. While the Essex case was being closed, Detective Constable Ian Clenahan needed to resolve the loose ends on his side. He tried to contact David several times, but was unsuccessful. So, he turned to his colleague Peter in Essex for help in getting in touch with David. Then Peter agreed and visited David. The meeting took place in the rural area of Essex, where there were only 4 houses, each with a name instead of a traditional number. Peter knocked on the first door, and an elderly couple answered. When they asked Peter whom he was looking for, he gave them the name David Davis. The couple informed Peter that their neighbor was not Davis, but Ronald Platt. They then described Ronald to Peter, and he realized that it was the same man he had met before. Redmond realized something was amiss. He reached out to Clenaghan in Devon and shared how, by pure luck, he knew more another part of the story. Detectives from both areas now understood that the situation was more complicated than at first. Peter turned his attention to collecting details about David, the man impersonating his deceased friend, Ronald. Then Peter returned to visit the elderly couple he knew as Frank and Aubrey. They recounted the story of Ronald Platt, his much younger wife, and their 2 young children. Ronald and his family often vacationed in Devon because they had a yacht there, but the specific name of the place couldn't be recalled. In Devon, Clenaghan began reviewing the evidence and started by interviewing old witnesses. His first visit was to John. When questioned, John explained that the net used had pulled up a 10-pound anchor along with Ronald's body. John had given the anchor to a friend, who then passed it to his mother to sell. Luckily, the anchor wasn't sold, allowing investigators to recover and preserve it as evidence. Clenaghan's next step was to interview people who knew Ronald. He reached out to Ronald's brother Brian, who mentioned Elaine Boyes, Ronald's former partner of 13 years. Investigators visited Elaine and uncovered the link between Ronald and David. Elaine had met David in 1991 while she was working as a receptionist at a fine arts auction house in Harrogate, England. She described David as tall, engaging, and charming. They then talked about David moving to Yorkshire and the subject turned to jobs. David wanted Elaine to join his company. Elaine mentioned it would be temporary because she and Ronald were planning to move to Canada. David, trying to win her over, suggested he could help them save money for the move. Soon, Elaine started working as his executive assistant and later introduced Ronald to David, leading the 2 men to quickly become friends. Ronald and Elaine was fascinated by David's boastful stories and admired his luxurious lifestyle. David offered them to become directors of his company, the Cavendish Corporation. Initially, Elaine was hesitant about the offer. David explained why he didn't want his name associated with the company. He claimed that his ex-wife was a wealthy doctor in New York who continued to demand alimony from him. At this point, Ronald and Elaine had come to trust David and believed that David was actually trying to keep distance himself from his ex-wife. David sends Elaine and Ronald to Europe to negotiate deals on his behalf and gradually draws them into his plot. On Christmas Day 1992, David invited the couple to spend the day with him and his daughter Noelle. After a satisfying meal, they sat down to exchange gifts. Elaine received a card titled "The Ultimate Gift." David had promised to buy Elaine and Ronald 2 tickets to Canada if they used them before February 1993. Elaine felt overwhelmed by the short notice, but Ronald was ecstatic. His lifelong dream of returning to Canada was coming true, thanks to the generosity of David, a man he considered a true friend. David persuaded them that it was better to begin their new life sooner rather. He quickly started preparing for their departure. David suggested to both Elaine and Ronald that they should have stamps made of their signatures, in case he needed to sign any documents urgently. David would also keep their driver's licenses with him in case he needed to prove their identity. This request wasn't difficult for the couple because they trusted David, who had just helped them get started. So, in February 1993, Elaine and Ronald flew to Canada to start their new lives. Canada did not provide the better opportunities Elaine and Ronald had hoped for. They arrived in the country during winter, found little work, and financial struggles quickly led to relationship issues. They attempted to overcome these challenges, but the increasing tension caused them to grow apart. 5 months later, Elaine went back to England to be a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, with no plans to return to Canada. David, now a family friend, was invited to the wedding. At the event, he spoke with Elaine and asked about Ronald. He was saddened to learn that she would not be going back to Canada and that her relationship with Ronald had ended. David attempted to persuade Elaine to reconsider and give Ronald another chance in Canada. When she declined, David suddenly changed tactics. He quickly arranged to move himself, leaving Elaine only with his mobile number. Their friendship eventually faded, and the calls stopped as well. Elaine and Ronald were no longer in touch. After leaving Canada, she had not communicated with her ex-lover Ronald or her former close friend David. So, when David reached out to Elaine late in 1996, she didn't think much of the unexpected conversation, as they had little to say to each other after such a long time. David did not mention Ronald, and that was the end of it. He did not tell her that Ronald had died. After the interview, Elaine told the police she suspected David might have been involved in Ronald's death. Elaine provided important clues about the relationship between David and Ronald, but investigators needed more concrete evidence. They started interviewing witnesses after the wedding in Harrogate. David quickly fled with his family to Devon, where he began using the name Ronald Platt. He introduced his pregnant daughter as his wife, sometimes calling her Elaine Boys and other times Noelle Platt. It was well known that he owned a yacht, which raised further suspicion. Witnesses reported seeing Ronald and David together a month before Ronald's body was found. They are said to have booked rooms at the Steam Packet Inn as brothers, David and Ronald Platt. By this point, the police were certain that David was lying about Ronald and what he knew about his death. They just needed one more piece of evidence. By examining David's mobile phone records, they found that calls were made from the same area where the medical examiner estimated Ronald had drowned. The Essex police planned a sting operation to arrest David on suspicion of Ronald's murder. They waited for him at the Chelmsford train station after receiving a tip-off from Elaine, who had arranged to meet David for coffee. However, David managed to slip away. Peter then was decided to drive by David's family home. In that place, Peter noticed activity, but he did not act immediately and requested reinforcements. Peter was assumed that David might be armed as they prepared to take action. A taxi arrived in the driveway, and David quickly escaped when the taxi sped off. The police chased him and eventually arrested him, pointing a gun at him. David surrendered without incident. What the police did not know was that this was just the tip of the iceberg. David was arrested, and his fingerprints were taken. Searching them in an international database revealed another twist to an already tangled plot. The fingerprints were identified as belonging to a man named Albert Johnson Walker, who was ranked number 4 on Interpol's wanted list and was Canada's most wanted fugitive. Albert's story starts in Canada, 6 years before Ronald's body was found in the Atlantic Ocean. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, on August 9, 1945, Albert always had big dreams. Although he dropped out of high school, but he worked as a bank teller and spent much of his free time socializing in Ontario. It was at a social event that he met his ex-wife, Barbara MacDonald. Albert proposed to Barbara after just a 4-day romance, and they got married in 1968. They quickly began their family, having 3 daughters and 4 sons, and raised them in Paris, Ontario. After years of assisting others with financial solutions, Albert, along with Barbara, launched a freelance bookkeeping business. The business flourished, and within a decade, it grew to 6 branches with over 30 employees. Friends were eager to invest with them, but Albert was secretly diverting their money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Eventually, problems began to surface. Albert's marriage ended due to his numerous affairs. The people he swindled money from began to get suspicious, so in 1990 Walker decided to leave before the situation became more tense. He told friends he was taking their 15-year-old daughter, Sheena, on a skiing trip to Europe, and used this as a cover to escape. Barbara realized what was happening and, concerned for her daughter's safety, reported her as a missing person. The police tried to chase him, but they lost track of him in London. He assumed a new identity, taken from a client, and started going by David Wallace Davis, while Sheena was renamed Noel. Although he managed to evade the authorities, the name David Davis was still linked to his true identity. He needed a new identity, and he had the perfect opportunity when he met Ronald Platt. Ronald had a very small circle of friends and was obsessed with living in Canada. Albert took advantage of this information. Everything was set in motion and Albert finally got the identity he needed. However, the plans fell apart when Ronald contacted Albert in 1995. Life in Canada wasn't as he had imagined it. Ronald informed Albert that he would return to Essex to settle near David. The solid foundation Albert was building started to show signs of trouble. Having two individuals named Ronald Platt in the same area with identical birth details was problematic for Albert. So, he devised a plan. He bought a yacht called Lady Jane and took his family and Ronald to Totnes in Devon to celebrate its launch. During the visit, they bought a new 10-pound anchor, which later turned out to be crucial evidence in an investigation. After returning to Essex, Albert invited Ronald back to Devon for another weekend, just two friends enjoying the coast and fishing. Albert sailed the Lady Jane out into open waters, far from the view of anyone on shore. He then struck Ronald on the head with the anchor, rendering him unconscious. Albert searched Ronald's pockets to remove any identification, secured the anchor to Ronald's belt, and threw him overboard. Albert believes it was the perfect murder. However, Albert made one critical mistake. He forgot to remove Ronald's Rolex watch, which eventually unveiled the meticulously planned crime. Albert's trial began in 1998, with evidence presented in court, including the anchor found entangled with Ronald's body in a net. Forensic experts determined that the head injury matched the shape of the anchor. Traces of zinc were found on the pants belt Ronald's, matching the zinc on the anchor. Albert had used the anchor to weigh Ronald down by attaching it to his belt. Further investigation of the Lady Jane revealed more evidence. Hairs matching Ronald's were discovered on a yacht cushion, and his fingerprint was found on the carrier bag used to transport the anchor back to the Lady Jane. Blood stains were discovered near the railway tracks at Albert's residence. The habit of accumulating documents harmed him, as they were confiscated and used to demonstrate his fraudulent businesses and deceitful activities. However, it was the testimonies of Elaine and Sheena that ultimately condemned him. Elaine's testimony demonstrated to the court that Albert stood to lose significantly if Ronald returned to England. Sheena dealt the decisive blow. She could not provide a clear alibi for Albert on the weekend of the murder. She stated that he had been on the yacht and appeared disheveled and agitated when he returned late on the murder day. Sheena's testimony marked a new phase in the investigation. She spoke in court about her life of fear with her father, his charm, and how she felt like a victim, just like anyone else who encountered him. When Albert took the stand, he appeared very charming and confident in court. He claimed that Sheena insisted on joining him and conceded to committing fraud and other illegal activities, but he firmly denied murdering Ronald. He explained that the blood found on the yacht was because Ronald had accidentally hit his head while they were fishing. Nevertheless, the jury quickly saw through his falsehoods and convicted him after only 2 hours of deliberation. High Court Justice Neil Butterfield addressed Albert, stating that the murder was carefully planned and executed with chilling efficiency. Justice Butterfield said that Albert was a plausible, intelligent, and ruthless man who posed a serious threat to anyone who stood in his way. Albert Johnson Walker was sentenced to 15 years to life in 2005 and was allowed to return to Canada to serve his sentence in 2007. At the age of 61, he was sentenced to 4 more years in prison to run concurrently with his sentence. In 2015, Albert applied for parole but withdrew his application at the last moment. Now, at age 75, the Canadian Parole Board has denied his application for day and full parole. His request to travel unaccompanied to Vancouver Island for a personal development program was also denied. It seems likely he will never be released. Albert seems to have accomplished the perfect crime. But then karma caused him to be exposed. If it weren't for Ronald Platt's real Rolex watch and a series of coincidences, he probably would have escaped legal punishment. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Jennifer Cronin. Jennifer Cronin and her daughter Susan lived in Essex, England. Jennifer was deeply devoted to her family and children. She was a kind, warm, and caring person who had a very attached relationship with Susan. They loved and admired each other greatly. This makes her cherish and appreciate their relationship. She grew up with a big dream, to one day having a family of her own, and children who would love and admire her just as she admired her own parents. In 1990, Susan was dating Kieran Lynch, a young bricklayer 3 years her senior. At the time, Susan was working as an apprentice hairdresser, known for her distinct style. Susan's friends were impressed by how Kieran treated her, often remarking that he seemed to adore her. Their relationship blossomed, and the couple got married in 1994. It was important to Susan that Kieran got along with her parents, which he did. In fact, Kieran quickly formed a close bond with Wyke's mother, Jennifer. Kieran and Susan had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly, who were very close to their grandparents and visited them at least twice a week. As soon as they heard grandmother's, Jennifer, gentle voice, the girls would excitedly run to her. When they were young, they looked up to their father as a perfect role model, the most kind-hearted and generous man they knew. Despite his busy work schedule, Kieran made time for his daughters, using all his free time to be with them. However, there was another side to his personality. He was highly competitive and always strived to be the best in everything he did and had a desire to be in control, creating a perfect image of their family. Kieran struggled to cope with the stress of supporting his wife and 2 daughters. As a result, he often lashed out in anger, damaging things and creating chaos. Over time, his behavior worsened, especially when he had been drinking. His temper tantrums became more aggressive and intense, causing his daughters to view him in a different light. They vividly remembered the incidents when their intoxicated father would shout, criticize, and eventually turn violent, smashing plates, slamming doors, and overturning furniture. In times of turmoil, the girls would find a safe haven, hiding from their angry father until he fell asleep. They moved quietly around the house, making sure not to wake him. After these tantrums, Kieran would often feel guilty and try to make amends. He would fix the things he had broken the day before and attempt to explain why he had acted that way. He would sincerely apologize to his wife and daughters, promising that it wouldn't happen again. However, he never changed, and then the same thing happened again and again. Like many people experiencing domestic violence, Susan felt deeply ashamed and humiliated, which led her to conceal the turmoil at home from everyone. Despite trying to appear strong in front of her daughters, Susan would often break down in tears at night, confused and hurt by the transformation of her loving partner into an overbearing and controlling presence. Whenever Kieran came home in a bad mood, Susan and her daughters would make to close the windows so the neighbors wouldn't hear the loud arguments. Even the smallest thing could make Kieran's become angry. If Susan was late coming home from work, Kieran would search the town for her. When the daughters grew up, they started to stand up to their father when he was being cruel to their mother, Susan. At first, this seemed to make Kieran behave better. However, One serious incident happened when Kieran, angry, almost hit his daughter, who stepped in to protect her mother, Susan. Although the family tried to hide their problems from those around them, the truth was eventually exposed. In 2015, people close to Kieran noticed a significant change in his behavior and appearance. A friend who hadn't seen him in months was shocked, and they met unexpectedly in the city. Kieran had lost significant weight and looked gaunt. His demeanor seemed distant and contemplative. It wasn't long before the cause of these changes became clear. While doing laundry, Susan found a packet of white powder in a small tube in Kieran's work clothes that she was washing. This discovery explained Kieran's recent erratic behavior, and it filled Susan with fear. Susan confronted her husband via text, lamenting his choices and saying he valued them more than family. Kieran didn't make any excuses, but instead asked Susan not to discuss the matter with their daughters. When large amounts of money started to disappear from their credit card, Susan tried to talk to Kieran about it, but he became defensive and aggressive. As a result, the home environment became increasingly tense and strained. Kieran's behavior becomes more and more scary. One time, while their daughters were away, he put a knife to Susan's throat and threatened to end both their lives. On another occasion, he set up a noose in the attic. As these frightening incidents grew more frequent, Susan realized that if she didn't act, the situation could have disastrous consequences. Despite her desire to protect her family, Susan found it hard to open up to her own mother, Jennifer, because she doesn't want her mother to be sad. However, Susan knew she had to take decisive action to change their situation. In November 2016, after 24 years of marriage, Susan and Kieran decided to separate. Kieran made the difficult decision to leave the family home and move back in with his parents. Susan understood that this was for the best, because their daughters are grown up and they should no longer endure their father's noisy arguments. Her top priority was the well-being of their children. The separation occurred with minimal conflict, and Susan was relieved, although she also felt guilty for not taking action sooner. However, little did Susan know that Kieran had no intention of giving up. After Kieran left, as the tension in the house finally dissipated, life started to get better, and for the first time in a long while, Susan felt happy again. She and her daughters were able to have normal conversations, watch movies together, laugh, and enjoy life without any stress. The worry about how Kieran would behave when he came home from work was gone. Susan realized that she was still attractive for men, and her confidence grew over time. People noticed that Kieran seemed to be moving on with his life, and Susan was glad that he had made some positive changes. Even though they were no longer together, Susan appreciated that Kieran was still a part of his children's lives. Susan had a tough time in her past relationships, so she was hesitant to get close to someone new. That was until she met Mike. As she slowly opened up to him, she shared stories about her previous, including her difficult past with her ex-husband, Kieran. To move forward, Susan knew she needed to finalize her divorce. Despite being nervous about Kieran's unpredictable behavior, she decided to take the first step by texting him to meet at a cafe to discuss their divorce. To her surprise, the encounter went smoothly. Kieran seemed to accept the idea of a divorce. And for once, they had a friendly conversation, reminiscing about their past experiences. They even exchanged kind text messages afterward, with Kieran expressing happiness for Susan's new relationship and Susan hoping he would find love soon. However, the next day, Susan received a barrage of messages from Kieran, and his attitude toward the divorce had taken a drastic turn. He now acted like he didn't care about his ex-wife, but he still had some demands. He wanted $60,000 in exchange for signing the divorce papers. Kieran argued that he had already left her the house and its contents, and therefore, he was entitled to compensation. But what worried her was Kieran's attitude in letting her move on. He couldn't stand the thought of another man replacing him. His texts even reveal a dark desire, her demise. At first, Kieran only threatened through text messages, but then he showed it through actions. He appeared in Susan's yard with a hammer, while she was home alone with her pet. Susan quickly called to request emergency assistance. By the time the police arrived, Kieran had already damaged some flower pots and outdoor decorations, but he had left the scene. 2 officers entered the property and listened to Susan's account. Kieran returned, loudly proclaiming his intent to confront his ex-wife, Susan, and said that no one could stop him. The police arrested Kieran for disturbing the peace. Even in handcuffs, he continued to insult his ex-wife. As a result, Kieran faced charges on 3 counts, making life-threatening actions, carrying a dangerous object, and causing property damage. On January 29, 2018, Kieran appeared in magistrate's court and denied all allegations against him. He was scheduled to appear in court again on March 29 and was released on bail under the condition that he avoid contact with Susan and stay away from her home. However, this decision left Susan and her daughters feeling uneasy and questioning the law's effectiveness in protecting them. Kieran disregarded the bail conditions and continued to contact Susan, violating the no-contact order. He repeatedly called her and even showed up at her residence, which intensified her fear for her safety. He falsely claimed to mutual friends that Susan's new boyfriend was sending him provocative messages. Kieran also targeted his daughters by contacting them, knowing they would inform Susan about his actions. Susan was on high alert at all times, worried about leaving her children alone due to Kieran's persistent calls, which sometimes exceeded 80 a day. These frequent calls often involved threats of him showing up at her location. When Kieran failed to comply with his bail conditions, Susan contacted the authorities again. During this time, Kieran made a concerning call to the emergency services and revealed that he tried to end his life but did not have the courage to do so. A team of psychologists and police officers was sent to engage with him. Upon their arrival, Kieran assured them he was fine, and as a result, he was advised to schedule an appointment with his family doctor. At the time, he did not appear to have any mental health problems. Kieran continued to harass Susan and family with calls and messages. He took invading their personal space. He snuck into the garage and cut off the power supply. He also tampered with the garden hose at Susan's mother's, Jennifer, house and would sometimes lurk under the windows at night. His actions caused fear in Susan, their daughters, and even her elderly mother, Jennifer. Despite Susan's repeated pleas for help, but the police were of no help to her. When they arrived, they took statements and promised to make an arrest Kieran, but they failed to do so. The police considered this a normal dispute between people going through a divorce, and they did not realize the seriousness of the situation. However, things took a darker turn when Kieran contacted his eldest daughter and made threats to sexually assault her. When Susan found out, she was horrified. The police launched a search for Kieran at his home but couldn't find him. They advised Susan and her daughters to go to a friend's house or to Jennifer's house to avoid having to stay home alone. Youngest daughter Matilda stayed at a friend's house, while the oldest daughter, Molly, went to visit her grandmother, Jennifer, who lived alone after her husband passed away. Molly and her grandmother, Jennifer, spent a peaceful evening together, watching TV, drinking tea, and chatting. For a short time, they were able to forget about Kieran's threatening behavior. However, when they went to bed, the phone started ringing. When Jennifer answered, there was complete silence on the other end, and she thought it was a wrong number. Nevertheless, the phone continued to ring repeatedly. Susan and Molly were anxious and uneasy due to the phone calls this continuous. Molly felt like someone was hiding in the garden. A shadowy figure appeared outside against the dark background. For safety, Molly locked themselves in the bathroom with Jennifer. It was around 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Susan's phone was flooding with more calls and texts, so she also contacted the police for help. Unfortunately, the police had limited resources and couldn't keep a constant watch for the person making the calls. They advised Susan to turn off her phone and make sure all doors and windows were securely locked. In the past 24 hours, the police had received 6 ask-for-help calls. However, the authorities claimed they didn't have enough personnel to send a patrol. On March 13, 2018, as her granddaughter left the house, Susan decided to visit her mother, Jennifer. She wanted to offer her mother comfort and reassurance, and she promised her mother that she would not stand by while her family was bullied and threatened by someone who did not accept their divorce. At 72, Jennifer stepped out into the garden with her dog, enjoying the warm daylight. From inside, her daughter Susan watched with a smile, happy to see her mother happy. Abruptly, a loud noise was heard from outside at 10:48 a.m. Kieran entered the garden with a container of flammable liquid. He yelled angry insults at his mother-in-law, Jennifer. Then he approached Jennifer, pouring the liquid on her head, face, and back. Jennifer was terrified and screamed as he continued. Susan quickly called the emergency services, asking for help. The operator told her to run out into the street to get away from Kieran, which she did right away. Susan sprinted to the end of the street and looked back, but no one was chasing her. Remembering her mother was still in the garden, she quickly turned around to return home. Just then, Kieran poured the remaining liquid on himself and lit it with a lighter. Flames erupted, engulfing he and Jennifer. Police, firefighters, and medical staff, along with an ambulance, quickly arrived at the scene. When Susan returned to her mother's garden, she was horrified by what she saw. Her mother and Kieran were badly disfigured. Her mother, Jennifer, had severe burns. Her hair, eyebrows, and eyelashes were completely gone. And her skin was badly charred. Despite being in agony, Jennifer made it clear to Susan how much she loved her and that Susan and her children meant everything to her. Even in her critical condition, Jennifer tried to comfort Susan, reassuring her that everything would be okay. Kieran was severely injured with burns covering his entire body. He was sitting against a wall, gasping for air and still smoldering from the fire. Susan was consumed by grief and anger, lashing out at Kieran for his actions. She was struggling to understand how the man she once married could cause so much harm to her mother, whom she loved and protected dearly, and couldn't fathom how their relationship had ended in such a tragic way. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of trying to kill Jennifer Cronin. Both Kieran and Jennifer were taken to the hospital with serious injuries. A few hours after the attack, Susan was called in for an interview to help figure out what happened. It was discovered that Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer with a flammable liquid and set them on fire in the garden. Kieran, a 50-year-old man, was going through a difficult divorce from his wife, Susan. She had repeatedly informed the authorities about his aggressive behavior, which was made worse by his use of illegal drugs. However, due to a lack of police resources, the situation spiraled out of control, leading to disastrous consequences. As a result, the incident quickly gained media attention, and the lack of decisive action by law enforcement was heavily criticized. The medical team informed Susan that Kieran's condition was extremely serious, with severe burns covering almost his entire body. This devastating news affected his daughters deeply, who remembered their father as a loving and caring person. One of them wanted to visit him one last time before he passed away. However, due to the extent of his injuries, only the tip of his nose was recognizable, and it had turned black from the burns. During this final visit, the daughter expressed her love for her father and mourned the tragic circumstances. A toxicology report later revealed that Kieran's body contained both alcohol and illicit substances. Meanwhile, Jennifer was also fighting for her life in the intensive care unit, with burns covering about a third of her body, mainly on her upper body and head. Despite undergoing surgical procedures, her chances of recovery were low due to the severity of her injuries. Susan visited her mother, Jennifer, in the hospital frequently, where she saw her mother's immense suffering. As the situation seemed hopeless, Susan had come to accept that her mother's passing was near and wished for her to be with her late husband, free from pain and discomfort. Unfortunately, Susan's mother only had a short time left. After 17 days, she passed away on March 30, 2018, at 13:32, with her family by her side. Although her time was almost up, her face remained peaceful. Susan held her mother's hand as she took her last breath, bringing an end to her mother's life on earth. On January 21, 2019, an in-depth investigation began at County Hall in Chelmsford, aiming to understand the incidents that led to the deaths of Jennifer Cronin, 72, and Kieran Lynch, 50. Susan, who was deeply affected by these losses, initially felt angry towards her ex-husband, Kieran. However, the investigation showed that law enforcement did not handle the situation well, so Susan's anger shifted towards them. Although Susan was aware of Kieran's unstable behavior, she had not anticipated that it would result in harm to her family. Susan publicly expressed her dissatisfaction with the authorities' handling of their situation, criticizing the police for their inadequate response and unkept promises. Specifically, she pointed out that Kieran's failure to be held accountable for breaching his bail conditions contributed to the tragic outcome of Jennifer's life. Susan hoped that this incident would serve as a lesson to the authorities, preventing similar tragedies from occurring in the future. She emphasized that the police have a fundamental responsibility to protect and serve the community, a duty that she felt was severely neglected in her family's case. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Denise Huskins. In the late hours of Sunday, March 22, 2015, 29-year-old Denise Huskins was alone in her Vallejo apartment in the San Francisco Bay Area of California. She had planned to spend the evening by herself, but her phone buzzed with a message from her ex-boyfriend, Aaron Quinn, asking to meet up for a discussion. Denise felt apprehensive, especially since they had ended relationship and she was hesitant to engage with him due to his past actions. Denise initially declined, telling Aaron it was too late and suggesting they talk another time. However, after receiving another message from him, she sat on sofa, contemplating her next move, and she thought about how she had met Aaron last summer. Originally from Boston, Massachusetts, Denise had a doctorate in physical therapy and had moved to Vallejo to join Kaiser Hospital, which specialized in treating individuals with head and spinal injuries. It was there that she met Aaron, a tall, athletic man with dark hair and striking eyes. Denise and Aaron quickly got acquainted and started chatting with each other. At first, they shared stories about their past. Aaron had been engaged before, but the relationship ended when he found out his fiancée had cheated on him. Denise listened and showed sympathy, but she found herself developing feelings for him too. As they spent more time together, their friendship has turned into love. By autumn 2014, they were officially a couple. However, things took a turn in March 2015, when Denise discovered that Aaron was secretly reaching out to his ex-fiancée, asking her to take him back. This revelation upset Denise deeply, and she decided to cut ties with him altogether. Even though she knew they had many common interests and had considered getting married, this fact still hurt her a lot. The feeling of betrayal and hurt overshadowed her love for Aaron, leaving her heart aching. She tried to ignore the stream of texts from Aaron, he asking to meet up and discuss their situation. His persistence left Denise torn and uncertain. Although her heart was still hurting, under his persistent persuasion, Denise began to feel shaken, and she gave in and agreed to meet. Denise got up from her sofa and prepared to leave her residence. At around 5:30 p.m., she got in the car and then, on the way, she stopped to buy a pizza. When she arrived at Aaron's two-story house on the 500 block of Kirkland Avenue, she collected the pizza from the passenger seat and took her purse before approaching the entrance. The next day, a workday for both of them at the hospital, Aaron called in sick at around 7 a.m., claiming illness. Denise also texted her supervisor, said she would be absent that week because she had family matters to attend to. This was an unusual thing for Denise, as she had never missed a day of work before. Denise's supervisor reminded her about the upcoming deadline for a scholarship, but she didn't respond. He assumed that something serious must have happened in her family. On the following Monday, when Aaron and Denise didn't show up to work, the Vallejo Police Department received a call from 30-year-old Aaron. His story was confusing and hard to believe. When the officers arrived at the scene, they found a strong chemical smell and many empty beer containers. Aaron also appeared disheveled. When questioned about the illegal substance use, Aaron admitted to using them, but claimed he had been forced by kidnappers. The officers were skeptical, so they continued their search, heading upstairs to the master bedroom. As they entered, the chemical smell grew stronger. The room appeared to have been recently cleaned, with spotless floors, except for a substance on the mattress. Just as they were about to leave, they noticed a small red blood spot on the bed. The officers returned downstairs to re-examine Aaron's account. He began to retell his story. The incident began at his residence around 3 a.m. where he and his girlfriend Denise were staying. A group of men wearing black aquatic gear stormed in, bursting into the house and shining a bright light directly into their eyes. Aaron couldn't determine the exact number of attackers, but they quickly restrained him and Denise with nylon cable ties. The assailants also made them wear swim goggles with an opaque coating, preventing them from seeing beyond the goggles. The attackers were equipped with laser-targeting guns, electroshock weapons, and powerful flashlights. As they moved through the house, strong light and laser beams intertwined, causing him and Denise to not be able to see anything. Aaron and Denise were asked to wear headphones that played a strange, calming music. A voice then told them through the headphones that they were not in any danger and this was just a robbery. The voice reassured them that if they stayed calm, no harm would come to them. Believing the voice, Aaron and Denise remained silent and still. Later, Aaron's headphones were removed, and he was ordered to move to another room. In this new room, the thieves demanded that Aaron give them his bank account information and other financial details. Aaron quickly gave them the information, realizing that his money was likely gone for good. Aaron and Denise were taken back to the living room by the burglars. One of them checked their blood pressure and then forced them to drink a mixture from a mug that contained a sedative mixed with another substance. Before the sedative kicked in, Aaron heard the burglars' final orders. They had installed cameras to monitor the house. He was told not to contact the police and was threatened that if he did, they would take Denise as a hostage. The burglars promised to send further instructions later. Soon after, the sedative took effect, and Aaron passed out, unaware of what was happening around him. When Aaron regained consciousness, he found Denise missing. He struggled to break free and managed to untie his hands, then grabbed the phone to call for emergency help. The police found the story he told suspicious, so they came up with another theory, that Aaron might have been involved in Denise's disappearance. Or even worse, her death. The police thought he might have hidden her body and then thoroughly cleaned the house to remove any evidence. The strong smell of bleach and other cleaning products seemed to further support their guess as being correct. He then turned to alcohol, as evidenced by the empty bottles and his incoherent speech. To appear innocent, he possibly delayed reporting the incident and created a false story about strange abductors wearing water gear to cover his involvement. The police, however, were not convinced by his tale and considered it a diversion. They asked him to prepare to go to the station for questioning. Following a 17-hour interrogation, the police were unable to find any concrete evidence to support Aaron's claims that Denise was still missing, despite his continued insistence that she was. The Vallejo police immediately started a thorough search by using K-9 units, divers, and many volunteers. After talking to Denise's roommate, they discovered Denise and Aaron had recently broken up, which could be a motive. However, before suspecting Aaron, they needed to consider the possibility of a real kidnapping. The police carefully looked at every detail of Aaron's story, searching for any information about the alleged kidnappers, such as what they looked like and what they said. As the investigation continued, they see Aaron's story became increasingly unreasonable. According to Aaron, he'd have given his banking information to the people who kidnapped him, but investigation found that his money was still there. Furthermore, just 2 hours before Aaron reporting the incident, he tried to withdraw a large amount of money from his account, saying he wanted to buy a boat. However, when questioned by detectives, Aaron said his kidnappers had actually demanded a ransom of $8,500. He couldn't convince the bank of this, so he made up the boat purchase story. The fact that the kidnappers had the temerity to capture him and Denise just for this money raised doubts about his story. During his interview, a detective noticed that Aaron's pupils were larger than usual, which could be a sign of drug use or a mental health condition, such as schizophrenia. It's also possible that his unusual story of being abducted by alien-like people could have been a hallucination. Due to the complexity of the case, the Vallejo police asked for assistance from the FBI. When the agents first arrived, they gave Aaron a polygraph test, which he failed. As a result, he became suspicious in the eyes of the investigators, so he quickly hired a lawyer to protect his rights. With the support of his legal team, Aaron let the police search his home, electronic devices, clothes, and even gave them a blood and fingerprint sample. The next day, the police organized a massive search in Vallejo, with over 100 teams participating. A police sonar detected an object in the bay that looked like a human body, but divers were unable to locate it. Meanwhile, Aaron has found a lawyer and is no longer in police custody. The search for Denise is intensified, with her picture being widely shared across various media platforms and displayed throughout the city. However, the detectives and FBI agents working on the case faced major obstacles. On the afternoon of March 24th, a journalist at the San Francisco Chronicle received a strange and unexpected email. The sender claimed to be the people who broke into Aaron's home, dressed in diving gear. The email stated that Denise was safe and included an audio recording of her summarizing recent news articles to prove this thing. This evidence initially alleviated concerns about her safety, showing that she was well up, at least until that morning. However, 2 aspects of this evidence raised suspicions. Firstly, Denise's message seemed unnaturally calm, similar to a news anchor reporting on a story. Secondly, the email was sent from an account belonging to Aaron, which led authorities to suspect that he and Denise might have been involved in staging the kidnapping. The police grew even more suspicious when Aaron presented his phone records, showing calls from the alleged kidnappers. However, these calls were made from an untraceable phone, which meant the caller's identity remained unknown. Investigators tracked down the location where this disposable phone was purchased, a store near Aaron's home. Surveillance footage from the store clearly showed an individual with a physical description matching Aaron's: tall, athletic build, and dark hair. This discovery further implicated Aaron in the suspected kidnapping plot Denise. 2 days after vanishing, Denise resurfaced at her mother's home in Huntington Beach, California, approximately 400 miles from Vallejo, where she was supposedly abducted. As she recounted her ordeal, her story became even more extraordinary than Aaron's account. Denise insisted she was kidnapped by 4 men who kept her confined to a small space. They told her that their actions were following instructions from a client. Despite this, Denise stated that her captors treated her relatively well, providing her with basic necessities such as food and water, and allowing her to maintain her personal hygiene. Denise was initially cooperative with the police, but she became defensive and sought a lawyer when she sensed the officers didn't believe her. This left the investigators confused and skeptical of her story. They thought that Aaron and Denise might have made up the abduction story to get attention, become famous, or escape their problems for a while. The detectives were known to understand why two successful people from wealthy families would create such a complicated and fake story. The Vallejo police held a news conference to reassure everyone that there was no need to be concerned about recent assaults in the area. Despite not identifying a suspect or confirming that an abductor existed, they maintained that residents had nothing to worry about. The media remained highly interested in the case, drawing parallels to the movie Gone Girl, where the main character stages her own disappearance. Authorities expressed disappointment that Denise and Aaron had fabricated this story, wasting their time and resources. They asked Denise and Aaron to issue an official apology to the people of Vallejo. However, Denise and Aaron stuck to their story, insisting they were truthful. In the early hours of June 5, 2015, a crucial clue was found in the Denise case. A police officer in Alameda County, Northern California, report received to a reported burglary at a residence. The homeowner and his wife reported that an intruder broke in under the cover of darkness, attempting to restrain them. The homeowner fought off the attacker while his wife locked herself in the bathroom and called for help. The attacker fled the scene, but in his haste, he left behind his smartphone in the hallway. The police found that the phone was registered to an individual through a telecommunications provider. They tracked the registered address but found the property empty and the mailbox full of uncollected mail. 3 days later, the police used the discarded smartphone to track a lead 200 miles northeast of Vallejo to an isolated cabin near South Lake Tahoe, California. The officers cautiously entered the cabin, where they found a tall, athletic man with dark hair amidst the clutter of leftover food, trash, and piles of clothes. Initially, they overlooked the vehicle parked outside. However, upon further inspection, they discovered that the car had been reported stolen and contained several unusual items, including flashlights, a plastic gun with laser sights, a modified headset, and a black diving suit. A laptop belonging to Aaron was also found in the trunk. This clue led to the capture of one of the individuals responsible for the abduction of Denise. The man, who bore a striking resemblance to Aaron, but was not him, had no prior connection to Denise and Aaron. The abductor was identified as Matthew Muller, a 38-year-old disbarred attorney who had graduated from Harvard University and was a former Marine with a previously reputation in the legal community. Matthew began to engage in strange and unlawful behavior. The authorities connected him to a home invasion in Dublin and discovered he was also involved in Denise's abduction from Aaron's home. The unusual story Aaron and Denise told to law enforcement was mostly true. Their only mistake was thinking multiple people in diving gear had invaded. In reality, Matthew was the mastermind behind the crime and acted alone. It's likely that Aaron and Denise were confused and half asleep, which led them to believe it was more than one person involved in the incident. The intense light caused Denise and Aaron to believe there were multiple attackers. This illusion was furthered by a pre-recorded message that played through headphones, in which the attacker claimed to be a member of a professional debt recovery team. Matthew had also been linked to a 2009 home invasion in Palo Alto but managed to avoid consequences due to lack of evidence. Matthew, a highly intelligent and trained lawyer, had carefully crafted an elaborate and outlandish scheme, made authorities suspected Denise and Aaron of staging a hoax. Matthew's actions were carefully planned, reflecting his intelligence, even though he was having mental health problems, bipolar disorder, and psychosis, and he believed he also had Gulf War syndrome, which made it difficult for him to distinguish reality. One day, Matthew randomly met Aaron and Denise, and he became fixated on them. He used a drone to secretly watch Denise and Aaron's every move for 3 weeks before abducting them. Aaron did notice a bright light in the sky the night before the incident, which he thought might be a drone, but he couldn't imagine someone was actually spying on him. Matthew put his plan into action, breaking into Aaron's home at night, while wearing a diving suit. He used restraints on both Aaron and Denise, covering their eyes with goggles and playing a pre-recorded message through headphones to make them believe multiple people were involved. Matthew then separated them, keeping them in different rooms. He attacked Denise, taking advantage of her vulnerability, and locked her in the trunk of his car. He then drove her to a remote cabin in South Lake Tahoe, where he held her for 2 days, then letting her go near her parents' house. Matthew also stole Aaron's laptop, which he later used to send an email to a journalist at the San Francisco Chronicle using special software. After waking up the next day, Aaron faced the devastating truth that Denise's kidnapping was real. Desperate, Aaron contacted his bank to request a large sum of money, $88,500, to pay the ransom. Panicked and trying to protect Denise, he came up with a false reason, telling the bank he needed the money to buy a boat. Later, Aaron contacted Kaiser Hospital and left a message for Denise's supervisor, informing them that she would be absent from work, as instructed by Matthew. The investigation uncovered a disturbing video recorded by Matthew, showing him physically abuse Denise. After seeing the evidence, the Vallejo police apologized to Denise and Aaron because at first thought they had made up the story of being kidnapped. Denise and Aaron decided to sue the city of Vallejo, citing the mistreatment they received during the investigation. The lawsuit ultimately resulted in a $2.5 million settlement, acknowledging the mistakes made in handling the case. Matthew Muller was found guilty of kidnapping charges and received a 40-year prison sentence in 2017. During his trial, Matthew expressed remorse for his actions and the pain he caused. After the kidnapping, the victim, Denise, faced skepticism and was even accused of making it up. Ironically, Matthew the crime came forward to defend her. He sent 2 anonymous letters to the media, claiming that the kidnapping had indeed taken place. Denise also experienced relentless nightmares and struggled to overcome the trauma. She waited until Matthew's conviction in 2017 to openly discuss the incident. Denise reported she being held by multiple men, which Matthew confirmed by admitting he had accomplices, although he refused to reveal their identities. Aaron and Denise grew closer, got married, had a child. Then they wrote a book together called Victory F that told the story of their experience. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Rudolph Farias. On March 7, 2015, Rudolph Farias walks with his 2 dogs. Afternoon, his 2 dogs came back separately to the front door of their home, dragging their leashes, but Rudolph was missing. Despite this, Janie relentlessly followed every small lead to find her son, but she was unsuccessful. Even with the many recent tragedies in the Santana family, Janie stayed determined in her belief that her son would be found. Speculation emerged that Rudolph's disappearance could be connected to his biological father. Rudolph's father, who was a law enforcement officer, was found dead from a gunshot wound in his patrol car. Before this, Rudolph's older brother had died in a car accident, and now Rudolph has vanished, leaving very little evidence to track him down. Janie, a resolute mother, was steadfast in not giving in to hopelessness. She took an active role in online forums to ensure her son's name and case stayed in the spotlight, hoping his story would not fade into obscurity. She believed that his disappearance might be linked to human trafficking and criticized the state police for their lack of action. Janie suggested there could be complicity within the law enforcement community, potentially shielding criminals and avoiding conflicts with powerful individuals. Ever since Janie started speaking out about the issue of human trafficking, she felt her safety was at risk. Her fears were confirmed when Rudolph's uncle, Jerry, died in a motorcycle accident on the second anniversary of his nephew's disappearance. Jerry had been actively involved in the search for the young man. On National Missing Persons Day, he gave an emotional speech about Rudolph's generous nature and compassion for others, highlighting the pain of a mother who has lost her child. Jerry never directly said that Rudolph had been harmed, but shortly before his unexpected death, he contacted the owner of a local social media outlet called Voice of Houston. This was a platform the family often used. Jerry wanted to schedule a meeting to share important information about Rudolph's case, which was planned for a week later. Sadly, Jerry died just a day before the meeting, suggesting he might have discovered sensitive information he wasn't supposed to. As interest in Rudolph's disappearance waned due to a lack of concrete evidence, Janie, with the help of volunteers and family members, created T-shirts with her son's image and shared his photos online. On the evening of June 29, 2023, a 911 emergency call reported finding an unconscious and injured young man outside the Immaculate Heart Church. That was a man in his 20s with minor injuries and bruises. After getting the emergency call, the law enforcement agents were uncertain about the man's identity. When he regained consciousness, the man was silenced, showed signs of fear and confusion, and had no ID or wallet. However, a crucial clue found in his pocket helped solve the mystery. Authorities identified the man as Rudolph Farias and contacted his mother, Janie Santana, to inform her. Janie recognized her son by his eyes and confirmed his identity, she quickly moving to his side and staying there constantly. After 8 years of despair, Rudolph's return felt almost miraculous to his family. Although he had not yet spoken to the authorities, it was expected that, once he was settled and at ease with his family, he would share his memory and explain how he ended up near the church, miles from home. Rudolph showed signs of physical distress, including leg ulcers, various cuts and bruises, and dried blood in his hair. However, these injuries could be treated. Janie took to her social media to thank everyone who helped keep the search for Rudolph ongoing. She acknowledged that she didn't have any new information about his whereabouts during the missing years but was committed to supporting his recovery, his health. She mentioned that trying to discuss his past made him withdraw, become silent, and curl into a fetal position. Despite this, Janie was deeply grateful that her son had returned after such a long time away. Rudolph always kept a pendant of his late brother with him. However, the story took an unexpected turn when a credit card was found in his pocket, issued in Janie Santana's name just 2 years earlier, providing the police with a crucial lead in solving the mystery of his disappearance. Due to Rudolph's 8-year absence, the existence of a relatively new credit card in his mother's name raised important questions. As detectives investigated with Janie's neighbors and family members, they uncovered intriguing information. The local community was stunned to hear on national news about Rudolph's dramatic recovery. They were convinced they had seen him at his mother's house not long before, unaware there was a missing person case related to Janie. The collective surprise was amplified by media stories, especially since the young man they recognized wasn't called Rudolph, but Dolph. Although Rudolph doesn't have a twin, neighbors often describe Dolph as introverted yet approachable. He was frequently seen socializing on the street or joining card games in garages. While gentle and friendly, Dolph always seemed confused and usually walked his mother to her workplace in the evenings. Janie encouraged her son's involvement with the neighbors, suggesting they invite him to dinner or give small gifts to show appreciation for their kindness. Despite Rudolph, which is very similar to Dolph, it puzzled the neighbors how this situation occurred. It was eventually revealed that Dolph and Rudolph were actually the same person, who had been missing for nearly 8 years. However, questions arose. Why were all the news outlets saying that the boy had been found, especially when, according to the neighbors, he never went missing? If his mother knew this, why was she often participating in missing persons forums and posting melancholy updates on social media? Who really is Janie Santana? When Janie Santana met her most recent spouse, she was already a mother to Rudolph, while her future partner had a child from a previous relationship. They were on the path to forming a big blended family. The kids got along right away. Rudolph was thrilled to gain a brother, Charles, who was 8 years older than him. Everything seemed perfect until, a year after the wedding, the husband discovered that Janie was simultaneously married to another man, making this her 5th marriage. After separating from her previous spouse, Janie did not want to complete the divorce process and became hostile toward her partner. She was fined $43,000 for her unlawful actions. Moreover, her siblings sued her for neglecting their elderly mother, Rose, who suffered from dementia and needed constant care. Although the siblings were ready to take care of their mother, Janie convinced Rose that living with her and Rudolph was the best option. Finally, Janie got the right to take care of Rose, but she faces terrible living conditions at Jane's house. Rose lived in an unhygienic environment, forced to sleep on a dirty and wet couch. The house was filled with animal waste because it wasn't cleaned regularly. Rose even had to go to the hospital because of infected bed sores. Jane's siblings tried to talk to Rose, but her mental abilities were impaired. Janie showed no willingness to make changes, leading them to take legal action against Janie for keeping a home that was not clean, safe, or suitable for an elderly person. In court, they claimed she was a compulsive liar who didn't properly care for their mother. However, Janie's attitude toward Rose did not seem loving. Her family believed she was mainly interested in the financial benefits from the state for caregiving Rose. Janie appeared to be a dedicated single mother, but she had unusual habits, especially a strong obsession with social media. She spent her free time focused on her online presence, where she mostly interacted with herself. Janie created several fake profiles to comment on her own posts. She used these accounts to have detailed conversations, asking questions and responding as if she were different people. Her goal was to create the appearance of popularity on her social media, making her profile seem very active. Like many people, Janie enjoyed drama and often turned small matters into big ones. One day, her son Rudolph had a swelling in his leg after visiting the family doctor, who confirmed that the swelling was harmless. However, Janie quickly took him to the emergency room, urging him to say he had taken many pills to try and escape an alleged cancer diagnosis. After his hospitalization, Janie took and shared a photo of Rudolph in his hospital bed, making her audience believe he was battling cancer. Some online users speculated that Janie might be showing signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where caregivers create or induce medical problems in those they care for to gain attention and sympathy by telling false stories of sacrifice and suffering. Despite this, children generally display different characteristics from their parents, and Rudolph was a clear example of this difference. Even though Rudolph's relationship was mainly his mom and her numerous partners, his personality was very different from Janie's. Rudolph was naturally compassionate and kind, always ready to help anyone in need, even if it was just a stray cat. As he grew up, he stood out for being shy, gentle, and introverted. Besides his mother, Rudolph's only true confidant was his beloved stepbrother Charles, who acted as both a father figure and an older brother. Rudolph looked up to Charles and wanted to follow in his footsteps, especially after Charles joined the Marine Corps. This motivated Rudolph to consider a career in the military as well. On a significant day, while Janie and Rudolph were at home, a phone call suddenly altered their lives. After receiving disturbing news, Janie, in a panic, rushed Rudolph outside. That day, Charles had been in a motorcycle accident near their home. The family, along with their mother, arrived at the scene before the paramedics. At only 13 years old, Rudolph faced the traumatic sight of his older brother dying by the roadside in Houston, an experience that deeply impacted him. On the first anniversary of Charles's tragic death, Rudolph, despite being young, used social media to express his grief. He recalled that it had been a year since Charles went to meet the Lord, regretting not having expressed his affection to him. Rudolph wholeheartedly wished his dear brother would come back. 3 years after Charles's passing, Rudolph's biological father also died, though they had barely had any contact. The father, a former police officer, was found dead in his patrol car. He had been dismissed from the force for falsifying reports and issuing excessive speeding tickets for personal gain. Over 3 years, he had illegally earned more than $150,000 through fake overtime. Facing humiliation and impending legal consequences, and unable to cope with the scandal and loss of his career, Rudolph, who essentially grew up without a father, had to accept the harsh truth that he would never have the chance to rebuild a relationship with him. This realization deeply affected his fragile mental state, stirring up feelings of resentment, sorrow, and anger. By the age of 16, Rudolph had already experienced the loss of 2 important people in his life, his stepbrother and his biological father. Despite having a mature understanding of grief, deep down, Rudolph still held on to the innocence of a child. His relatives noticed that emotionally, he was like a 10-year-old, trusting, gentle, sweet, and naively youthful. Time later, Rudolph suddenly disappeared. For the next 8 years, Janie shared the story of how he went missing after a routine dog walk, which usually lasted 15 to 20 minutes. When 2 hours passed without Rudolph returning, Janie felt a surge of motherly panic after hearing barking at the door. She hurried to check and found only one dog, its leash dragging behind it having come back alone. She guessed that Rudolph had gone to look for the other dog, causing his delay. The second dog didn't return until the next morning, but Rudolph was still missing. Janie was very upset when she called the police and accidentally gave the wrong birth date for her son. This caused the officers to think Rudolph was an adult. As a result, they didn't act quickly because they assumed the teenager had simply decided to leave home on his own. The search focused on the usual route Rudolph would take, where they found a backpack with notebooks and an asthma inhaler. Janie confirmed that these items belonged to her son, although there was no sign of criminal activity. The detectives considered the teenager missing, and Janie assumed the role of a worried mother. She quickly made and distributed posters with her son's picture all over the city, rallying the support of the police, family, friends, and the general community in the search effort, who showed empathy and offered their help. Over time, the story of Rudolph's disappearance faded as law enforcement personnel changed and the community moved on with their lives. Janie was the only one who remained dedicated to finding her son. She created a webpage for Rudolph's search, appealing to the public's empathy and raising over $2,000 in donations to support the effort. Over the years, as official investigations made little progress, Santana began using online forums and social media to express her worries. Feeling something was seriously amiss, she expressed her intention to travel to a town on the USA-Mexico border, believing that Rudolph had become a victim of human trafficking. She decided to embark on a personal quest to rescue him. Janie described the trip to her family and friends as dangerous and challenging, and she even started a fundraiser to pay for it. However, those who knew her suspected that Janie might be using Rudolph's situation as an excuse for a short vacation and a way to collect money. They had backed her before in similar ventures, dropping everything to join her in her travels whenever rumors of Rudolph's sightings popped up across the country. After each fruitless search, Janie would lament on social media the pain of being separated from her son, pleading with guardian angels to protect him while she was away. Through her posts, she would speak directly to Rudolph, expressing how much she missed him. Meanwhile, as she crafted these sorrowful tales, Rudolph was actually at home for 8 years. Janie had isolated him, keeping him behind a locked door. Although not physically chained, Rudolph experienced psychological imprisonment, losing his freedom. Rudolph became disheartened by the way he was treated at home, feeling that he were deeply disrespected, leading Rudolph to decide to escape. His attempt to break free took about 24 hours. By the next day, he was back home, a detail only Janie knew. It seemed like the mother had used this incident both as a punishment and as an opportunity to draw attention to herself. After a long walk with the dogs, during which he was gone for several hours, Rudolph wanted to apologize for the worry he had caused. But Janie told him that he was now wanted by the police. She made up a story about him getting a speeding ticket days before, and with his disappearance already reported, she hinted that the authorities believed he was avoiding legal consequences. Now labeled as a criminal, Rudolph, with no legal knowledge and trusting mother. Thus, he spent the first day locked in his room, which turned into a week, then a year, under his mother's manipulative influence. Every time visitors came, Rudolph would retreat to his room and remain completely silent, a prisoner in his own home. Rosa, Rudolph's grandmother, knew he was present and tried several times to tell her children. However, Rudolph's aunts and uncles ignored her, thinking she was just confused due to senile dementia. After the case was settled, Janie let her son go out occasionally to visit the neighbors, but now she called him Dolph. The missing person posters showed his photo at 14, so it's no wonder many didn't recognize him. His mother thought a childhood photo would evoke more sympathy from people. Sometimes, she'd give him her credit card and send him to the store to buy groceries or other things to keep him from realizing she was using him. Janie secretly added illegal substances and sedatives to his meals, which made him feel slow and unable to think clearly. She kept threatening him with jail and the police, so he reluctantly remained at home. There were many rumors about Janie's inappropriate behavior with her adult son. She would enter his bathroom without knocking and make Rudolph lie with her under the blanket without clothes. However, Rudolph suggested there were some intimate moments between them. He felt that his mother still treated him like a child and just acted as though he were her husband. The family also saw Rudolph in town more than once and reported it to the police. Uniformed officers would come to Janie's house and even look inside, but without a warrant, they couldn't enter. During this time, Janie acted calmly, not raising any suspicions among the officers. The cops would leave, saying the tip was false. No law enforcement officer, no family member, nobody could have imagined that Rudolph had been quietly living under his own roof, rarely going out. After enduring 8 years of being stuck at home, Rudolph came up with a plan. In the middle of the night, he grabbed his mom's car keys and credit card and sneaked out without a clear destination. Even though he hadn't driven in 8 years, he only managed to be behind the wheel for a few minutes before crashing the car, ending up with numerous cuts and bruises. He left the keys in the car and continued on foot until he reached a church. Exhausted, he collapsed. Janie posted a photo of Rudolph in a hospital bed on social media to gain sympathy. This picture was taken 8 years ago when he was hospitalized for a leg tumor. The authorities quickly tried to move Rudolph to a hospital, but his mother convinced them that his condition would worsen there, so she decided to take him home instead. In truth, she was worried that Rudolph would reveal the truth when he woke up. On July 5, 2023, Rudolph gathered enough courage to speak up and confided only in a local activist named Quell, known for advocating for the rights of discrimination victims. Quell helped people share their cases through media coverage and negotiations with law enforcement. Despite Janie's constant interruptions during the conversation, Rudolph managed to express his side of the story. Eventually, it became clear that Janie's presence was hindering the dialogue, and she was asked to leave the room. Rudolph showed signs of self-harm, reflecting the impact of his confinement. Despite feeling uneasy sharing a bed with his mother, he stressed his lasting love for her. Quell publicly expressed that a mother who did such things should face consequences for her actions and was surprised that Janie was not yet arrested. Quell was deeply moved by Rudolph's story. However, that very night, Rudolph went back home with his mother. Janie, trying to manipulate him emotionally, threatened to harm herself unless Rudolph withdrew his statement to the police, not knowing their conversation was being recorded. Meanwhile, Janie stuck to her false story. At a press conference, the police announced that they would not press charges against Janie for now, due to insufficient evidence of her wrongdoing. Rudolph is currently staying with a family friend, but it is unclear how far his mother might go to regain custody of him and attract more attention on social media. The International Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which operates worldwide, reports that hundreds of thousands of missing children are reported every year, and that parents are often involved in these disappearances. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nicole Hutchings. Nicole Hutchings, known as Nikki to her family and friends, was born on June 15, 1983, in San Francisco, California. Although her biological father was no longer in the picture, her stepfather, James Hutchings, stepped in and formed a deep bond with her, like that of a natural father and daughter. From an early age, James cared for Nicole as if she were his own child, earning the affectionate nickname Dad from her. Over time, the family grew with the addition of two more children, Amanda and Timothy. After James left the Marine Corps in 1987, he and his wife Robin decided to raise their family in a quieter environment. They moved to Bend, Oregon, where Nicole saw her first snowfall. The Hutchings family settling into a quaint 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house on the edge of the Deschutes River. The river flowed right into their backyard, providing endless fishing opportunities. Nicole's parents once took her to Drake Park, a popular green space in the city known for its year-round events like musical evenings and outdoor movie screenings. It was also a perfect place for peaceful walks in nature. When Nicole saw duck sculptures for the first time and was still learning to speak, she lovingly called her grandfather Grandpa Duck. As she grew older, the park remained dear to her and continued to be her favorite spot in the city. Eager to learn, Nicole was excited about gaining new knowledge. She also loved hiking, crafting, and writing poems. She attended Mountain View Middle School, where she was popular among her peers, although her bluntness sometimes led to conflicts. One major incident resulted in her expulsion. Nicole completed her schooling in 2004 and returned home. The Hutchings family valued their time together at home. By then, they had moved to a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, just a 15-minute drive from their old place, in a busier suburban area at the end of a cul-de-sac. The Hutchings home provided stunning views of the mountains, especially as Halloween, also known as All Saints' Day, drew near. The children in Bend, like those across the United States, loved dressing up for trick-or-treating. Almost every house was decorated, and residents enthusiastically prepared candy to welcome costume kids at their doors. By now, the Hutchings children had grown older and were more interested in parties and celebrations than trick-or-treating. Nicole was 21, Amanda was 17, and Timothy had just turned 13. On the evening of Sunday, October 31, 2004, Amanda was getting ready for her shift at a nearby department store, planning to finish around 8 p.m. Since she didn't have a driver's license, she relied on her parents or Nicole for a ride home. Although the store was close by, Amanda was reluctant to walk home alone after dark, especially on Halloween, so she asked Nicole to pick her up. However, Nicole planned to stay home handing out candy. Their dad, James, who worked as a bus driver, offered to pick Amanda up, prioritizing her safety. Before Amanda left, Nicole, with a serious expression, mentioned she wanted to discuss something important with Amanda when she returned. The day began normally, with Robin and Nicole happily handing out candy to visiting children. After James came home and had dinner, he went out to pick up Amanda and run some errands. By 10 p.m., when the doorbell rang again, it seemed too late for young visitors. With Robin busy, Nicole answered the door and was pleasantly surprised to find several of her friends. They were on their way to a nearby Halloween party at a friend's house and wanted Nicole to join them. Nicole was excited to join the holiday festivities. She told her mother about her plans to spend the evening with friends. Robin, comfortable with her daughter's independence, trusted Nicole's responsible nature. She wished her a great time and let her go to the celebration without worry. Little did she know, this farewell would be the last time she saw Nicole's joyful smile. The celebration was filled with both familiar and unfamiliar faces, all apparently enjoying the festivities. Nicole came in her everyday clothes because she didn't have time to dress up. The atmosphere was lively with loud music, and the attendees were involved in typical youthful activities, drinking, dancing, and celebrating until the early hours of November 1st. As the excitement of the mysterious night faded and life returned to its usual pace, the Hutchings family started their day with their regular morning routines. During this time, James noticed that Nicole was missing. Her bedroom was empty. He had come home the night before with Amanda and assumed Nicole was asleep. Robin informed him that Nicole had gone to a Halloween party, so James initially thought she might be sleeping at a friend's house and expected her to return or call by midday. However, her belongings, including her bag and documents, were untouched in her room, a clear sign of her unexpected departure. Worried, her parents began calling Nicole's friends, hoping to find clues about where she might be. They spent the night trying to locate her, a step that preceded the tough decision to call the police. Despite all efforts, Nicole's whereabouts remained a mystery. At this juncture, the Hutchings family was overwhelmed with a sense of fear, which led them to contact the Bend Police Department. At the station, they were informed that Halloween night is known as one of the worst of the year due to a significant spike in criminal activity. During this time, there are many car break-ins, acts of vandalism, alcohol-related crimes, violence, and even deadly crimes. The police usually don't respond immediately to reports of missing adults, as many return after a short time. However, the fact that Nicole's money and ID were still at home raised concern. The Bend police knew that Nicole was 21 years old, stood 5 feet 5 inches, weighed 159 pounds, and had brown hair and blue eyes. Other distinguishing features included a small gap between her front teeth, a pierced thumb, and tattoos of a rose and a dolphin on the back of her left shoulder. She was last seen wearing a dark burgundy polo shirt with an emblem, black pants, and white sneakers. Detective Brian Kendall from the Bend Police Department met with the Hutchings family to draft a detailed report. He talked with Robin, Amanda, and James, who shared their perspectives. Amanda said her sister wanted to talk about something important that evening. The parents told the detective about Nicole's ex-boyfriend, Bobby. At first, the family liked Bobby because he seemed charming and got along well with them. However, they later suspected he was hiding his true personality, especially in relation to Nicole. Detective Brian decided to investigate Bobby further. He planned to ask Nicole's friends about the Halloween party, including who organized it and who attended. Currently, the Hutchings family was deeply worried because there had been no news about Nicole for over a day. When the detectives met Bobby, they asked him about Nicole. He claimed he wasn't keeping track of his ex-partner, as they had broken up just the previous weekend. Although the detectives were doubtful, a lie detector test showed he was telling the truth. It was later confirmed that he had an alibi for Halloween night, leading the authorities to look for other leads. The Bend police issued a statement asking for any information about Nicole and urging the public to contact Detective Brian. A woman named Mary provided key information. She mentioned that her housemates, Loren Bowers and Craig Whiting, hosted the Halloween party that Nicole attended. Loren had a girlfriend with 2 kids, one 6 years old and the other 4. Nicole used to visit them often to look after the kids, and that's how she met Mary. At the party, everything seemed normal. Many people came and went throughout the night, with some bringing friends along. However, the detectives now had 2 people they could contact. After getting their addresses, the police officers approached Loren and Craig for more information. They spoke with Loren's 30-year-old girlfriend, and Craig was identified as a close friend of the Hutchings family. They often visited in the evenings to invite Nicole to parties. Craig remembered last seeing her at the party around midnight, a time when everyone was drinking heavily, so no one knew where she went afterward. Although their friends were really worried about her safety, they still hoped she'd come back. Unfortunately, she'd vanished without a trace since the incident. Investigators questioned other attendees of the event, but nobody could remember exactly when she had left. Despite not having concrete answers, they continued their investigation and decided to expand the search beyond state borders. Nicole's photo and detailed information about her disappearance were shared with law enforcement agencies across the country. With no new leads, the investigators chose to examine the backgrounds of both the residents of the house where the party took place and the guests. It was crucial to start their inquiry somewhere. Craig had a clean criminal record, but Loren was involved in a questionable incident related to Nicole. Surprisingly, it was revealed that a man had been a convicted offender 10 years prior. Loren, now 34 years old, had been accused of contributing to the delinquency of minors. He admitted his past wrongdoings to Detective Brian and offered to help in finding Nicole as a way to demonstrate his reformed character. Although this information was concerning, there was no direct evidence linking Loren to Nicole's disappearance. The investigation was still in the early stages of gathering information. Meanwhile, Nicole's family started a community search in Bend. They distributed flyers with her photo and details, contacted local media, and urged anyone with information to report it to the authorities. Reports emerged of sightings of her in different parts of the city, though none were confirmed. Despite this, these reports gave the Hutchings family some hope. James, who works as a bus driver, would carefully check Drake Park, Nicole's favorite local spot, every time he passed by, hoping to see her. Accepting her disappearance was difficult for the family, who held on to the hope of her return. Every knock on the door brought the hope that it might be Nicole, but it never was. The situation took a dark turn when an informant revealed to the police that a man known as Spider had confessed to friends that he killed Nicole and hid her body on his property. Spider's real name is Danny Shane, a criminal linked to a local gang called the Park Rats, infamous for their illegal activities in Bend, particularly around Drake Park. Nicole and Danny had known each other since high school, although Danny had changed a lot since then. The police questioned him. Although they did not know what his motive was for lying about killing Nicole, he was released after passing a lie detector test. Continue the investigation. The investigators monitored Nicole's financial and digital footprints, like her credit card, bank account, and cell phone. After months of effort, they detected activity on one of Nicole's cards, sparking a glimmer of hope that she might be alive. However, this hope quickly faded when Nicole's mother, Robin, revealed that she had been using her daughter's credit card. Over time, interactions with the detectives became less frequent, reflecting the stagnation of the case. Life for the Hutchings family members becomes dull after Nicole's murder. Amanda completed her high school education and applied to various colleges, including the University of Minnesota. She awaited acceptance letters, but her college aspirations seemed trivial after her sister went missing. Eventually, she received news that she had been accepted to the University of Minnesota with a full scholarship. Although this news was joyful, she felt she couldn't leave her family during such a difficult time. The story of Nicole Hutchins' disappearance was fully uncovered only after 3 long years. It became clear that someone was hiding crucial information, fully aware of the events that had occurred, but lacking the courage to speak the truth. In March 2007, a woman named Jenny came to the Bend police station to speak with the detective in charge of investigating Nicole's murder. Jenny, who was once in a relationship with Loren and had 2 children with him, was motivated by their tumultuous history and breakup to reveal what she knew. As an old acquaintance of Nicole, Jenny was initially interviewed after Nicole disappeared, but she lied to protect herself. Later, she disclosed that Loren, her ex, had confessed to killing Nicole, although there was no physical evidence or remains to support his claim at that time. The detectives came up with a plan, getting Jenny to secretly record a conversation with Loren using a hidden microphone to question him about Nicole. They arranged the meeting in a park where Jenny, under a lot of pressure, asked about Nicole's fate. Loren, initially suspicious, eventually confessed to Jenny. Because of Jenny's previous silence, he justified his actions by claiming that Nicole was a threat to their relationship and that he couldn't risk going back to jail. She eventually gets a confession out of him. Loren was arrested on March 12 to help protect Jenny from potential consequences. Further investigations revealed that Loren had 2 previous convictions for sexual assault, leading to a 2-year prison sentence. His victims were between the ages of 13 and 16. After his release in 1997, Loren briefly violated his parole and was later convicted for unlawful possession of a firearm, theft, and giving false information to police during arrest. Loren emotionally denied any role in Nicole's disappearance, accusing his friend Craig of setting him up. This accusation was later confirmed to be true. Craig, a close family friend of the Hutchins who had lived with them for a while, came to pick up Nicole on that Halloween evening. He takes a deep breath and reveals that Loren asked him to help kill Nicole. Craig explained that Nicole had been spreading rumors about Loren, accusing him of inappropriately touching one of the children she babysat. If these rumors became public, Loren would end up back in prison. Nicole learned from the children that Loren had acted inappropriately, including taking a nude photo of one child. This was a grave allegation with potentially serious repercussions. Nicole then informed the child's mother about the situation and filed a formal complaint with the Oregon Department of Human Services. Facing the possibility of returning to prison, Loren decided to take drastic measures. How did Craig fit into all of this? It turned out that Craig had a disturbing childhood experience that deeply affected his mind. When he was 11, his mother's partner beat her to death and hid her body in the basement under their trailer, where they lived next to the decomposing remains for several weeks. This probably left a mark on Craig's life forever. Nevertheless, he justified his actions regarding Nicole by claiming that Loren was like a brother to him. If a brother asked for help, he felt compelled to do everything for him. After a few days, Craig finally agreed to show the detectives where Nicole's body was buried. By doing this, he avoided the death penalty, but he showed no remorse or compassion. The location was deep in a forest, about 20 miles from the Halloween party. Craig led the police to a spot among the trees where he claimed Nicole had died. In a shallow grave, officers discovered what they believed to be the remains of Nicole. She had done everything she could to protect an innocent child and ensure their safety, only to fall victim to someone who chose to silence her rather than face the consequences of his terrible actions. According to Craig's testimony, already in October 2004, Loren, along with his best friend Craig, came up with a plan to get rid of Nicole. To execute their plan, they organized a large Halloween party right before the incident. They traveled to a remote location and dug a shallow grave about 3 feet deep. On Halloween, Craig lured Nicole away from her home and brought her to the party. They drugged her drink with a painkiller, leaving her barely able to stand or move. Completely incapacitated, her friends put her in a car with Loren driving and took her to the planned burial site. Nicole, weak and vulnerable, was led to a temporary burial site. There, Loren struck her head with a bat that had a heavy metal tip. Craig thought one blow would knock her out, but it only caused Nicole to stumble, and she tried to get up again. Loren then grabbed a branch and repeatedly hit her until she lost consciousness. Before Nicole stopped breathing, they stripped her and threw her into the pit, covering it with thick soil. The most tragic part of this story is that Nicole was still alive at that point, dying alone in the dense woods, betrayed by two people she trusted on that horrific night. When the Hutchings family was informed about Nicole's death, her parents were stunned. Craig, whom they had welcomed into their home, and Loren, a friend of Nicole, shocked them with their actions. James will never forget the moment he identified his daughter's dolphin emblem at the coroner's office. He expressed his desire to personally confront the culprits. However, legal restrictions made it impossible. Years passed before Loren and Craig admitted their guilt for the brutal attack, each receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. The tragic story of Nicole Hutchings serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. As her family navigated the painful aftermath of her disappearance, they uncovered a chilling narrative of deceit and violence that forever altered their lives. Nicole's legacy now stands as a testament to the importance of speaking out against wrongdoing, ensuring that her courageous act of protecting the innocent is never forgotten. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Judy Blake Moylanen. Judy Diane Blake was born on October 16, 1957, into a conservative family in Hancock, Michigan. As the only daughter of Dale and Mary Ann Blake, she was cherished by her parents and her two brothers, Jerry and David. In addition to being active members of the Redeemer Free Lutheran Church, her parents owned a business named Dale Service, which allowed them to give their children a loving and comfortable life. Judy grew up to be a beautiful young woman who dreamed of having her own family. In 1974, she met the love of her life, Bruce Moylanen. Both worked in healthcare. Judy was a nurse, and Bruce was support staff. Bruce was 3 years older and had a very different personality. While Judy was shy and sweet, Bruce was outgoing and confident. Judy came from a tight-knit and religious family, whereas Bruce did not have a close relationship with his own. Despite their differences, they get along very well. Judy admired Bruce's confidence, and Bruce saw Judy as the ideal partner to build a life with. However, Judy's family had their doubts about Bruce, even though she was fully supportive of him. Judy and Bruce married in 1978. Over the years, Judy's family made significant efforts to include Bruce as part of their family, and it appeared that he bonded well with them. The family celebrated the arrival of Judy and Bruce's only daughter, Elise, in 1989. For several years, they enjoyed a happy life together, unaware that everything was about to change dramatically. On November 29, 1992, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, Judy and Bruce were visiting the Blakes with their young daughter, Elise. It was also the final day of the hunting season in the Upper Peninsula. That morning, Bruce went with Judy's brothers to hunt for deer in the nearby woods, while Judy stayed at the house with her mother and daughter. In the afternoon, Judy took her parents' dog, Streak, for a walk in the woods behind the Blakes' property on Highway 38 in Ontonagon County, Michigan. As Mary Ann said goodbye, she didn't know it would be the last time she would see her daughter. After 2.5 hours without any word from Judy, Mary Ann started to worry about her safety. Even though Judy knew the woods well, there was a chance she could have had an accident or run into trouble, especially since it was still hunting season. Concerned, Mary Ann took a neighbor with her and went into the woods to search for her daughter. They were trying to follow Judy's footsteps on the walking path, but it was getting darker and harder to see. After nearly an hour, Mary Ann stumbled upon a harrowing sight that no mother should ever see. About 500 to 600 feet into the woods, Mary Ann and the neighbor found Judy lying still on her side. Her dogs were nearby, wandering alone. When they turned Judy onto her back, they discovered a bloody chest wound, and it was clear that she was already deceased. Screaming at the top of her lungs, Mary Ann rushed back to her house to inform the local authorities about what had happened. Investigators quickly determined that Judy had died from a gunshot wound. As the night grew colder, police officers searched the woods for evidence, relying only on their flashlights. Despite thoroughly searching the area, detectives found very few clues. They couldn't locate the bullet that killed Judy, but they did discover an important piece of evidence. It was a scorch mark on a maple tree. Bob Ball, the lead detective on the case, concluded that the blaze mark could have been made by the same bullet that killed Judy. He believed that if he could locate the bullet, he could trace it back to the shooter, which would provide insights into how Judy was shot. Forensic tests on the scrapings later confirmed that the mark was caused by a bullet impact. By analyzing the position of the body and the blaze mark, investigators determined that the bullet struck Judy first, passed through her heart, exited her body through the left side, hit a tree, and then landed somewhere in the woods. At the time, the incident was viewed as a tragic accident. Investigators thought that Judy was accidentally shot by a stray bullet from an unknown hunter, which was not uncommon in that part of the Upper Peninsula. In fact, there had been a few similar hunting incidents in the area before this one. Unfortunately, it was challenging to find the person responsible for Judy's death because bullets from high-powered hunting rifles can travel over 3 miles. Often, hunters are unaware that their bullets have harmed someone. Detective Bob aimed to remain open-minded as Judy's body was transported to the medical examiner's office. Meanwhile, the detectives began interviewing family members. Although everyone appeared deeply distressed by the tragedy, one comment from Bruce raised Detective Bob's concerns. Bruce criticized his late wife for not being more cautious and for not wearing orange while in the woods. This drew suspicion towards him, as it is common for investigators to focus on those closest to the victim in cases of violent crime. However, Detective Bob also believes that Bruce is just a grieving husband trying to hide his sadness. Additionally, Judy's family maintained that Bruce was with them all day and were convinced he had no involvement in their daughter's death. They expressed frustration towards the police for considering him a suspect. This marked the beginning of a complicated investigation. 2 days later, the autopsy report provided important information. The estimated time of death was around 3 p.m. When Detective Bob returned to question the Blake family with this new detail, they admitted that while Bruce spent most of the day with them, they did not keep an eye on him during that specific time. Despite this, they remained unfazed and strongly believed in his innocence, openly defending him. They were unhappy with the investigation because they believed the police had wrongly targeted a man who was still grieving his wife's death. At that time, Judy's family was unaware that detectives had additional reasons to suspect her death was not accidental. Forensic evidence revealed that the bullet entered her body at a lower point than it exited, indicating it passed through at an upward angle. This detail was crucial. If a hunter had fired the shot, the bullet would have entered at a downward angle, suggesting it came from a greater distance. It now seemed almost certain that Judy had been intentionally killed. Was Bruce truly involved, or was he merely a target of the detectives' narrow focus? Due to this new evidence and doubts about his alibi, the detectives decided to investigate Bruce Moylannon more closely. On December 11, 1992, just 12 days after the investigation began, Bruce was called to the sheriff's office for formal questioning. Within minutes, during his conversation with Bob Ball, Bruce provided a detailed account of where he was on the day his wife died, naming nearly 30 different people who could corroborate his story. Despite his detailed account of the day's events, there was a missing 30-minute gap that he could not explain. Detective Bob grew suspicious of him, especially since he consistently denied any involvement in his wife's death. During the interview, Bob questioned whether Bruce was actually interested in hunting deer that afternoon or if he had other intentions. While the matter of Bruce's innocence remained unresolved, his actions suggested otherwise. He hardly seemed to mourn. Just weeks after Judy's death, he was going on ski trips, socializing with friends, and flirting with some of Judy's acquaintances instead of focusing on his wife. By this point, even Judy's family had started to doubt him, despite their earlier support. His behavior was the reason for their suspicions. Detectives were actively investigating the case but had not found any concrete evidence against him. To gather more information, Detective Bob asked some of Bruce's friends and co-workers to discreetly monitor him and inform the police if they noticed anything unusual. This led to a shocking discovery. Detective Bob made a call to 35-year-old Gail Lampinen, who worked with Bruce. She had a story about him. After the funeral, Bruce unexpectedly showed up at her house with 5 boxes containing his deceased wife's belongings. He placed the boxes on Gail's porch and walked away before she could ask him anything. Because it was the holiday season, Gail left the boxes outside for some time without looking inside. When she finally opened the boxes, Gail discovered that they were filled mostly with Judy's clothes. However, beneath the clothing in one of the boxes, she found a letter dated 6 months earlier and signed by Judy. This discovery was surprising for Gail, as she had only met Judy once. What made it even more unusual was the content of the letter. It began with Judy expressing her wish for Gail to have her old clothes as keepsake gifts, as she believed Gail was the only person Bruce truly trusted. The letter further revealed intimate details about Bruce and Judy's marriage, indicating that they no longer saw eye to eye and were close to separating. It also mentioned that Bruce needed a new girlfriend. The most unusual aspect of the letter was that the writer complimented Bruce's abilities in bed. This raised a red flag for Gail, who immediately sensed something was off, and the detectives shared her suspicion. To verify the letter's authenticity, they approached forensic document examiner James Stiegel. His job was to compare the letter to Judy's known handwriting samples to see if she had written it. Handwriting analysis revealed that the letter's writing was slow and deliberate, which could indicate it was forged. Ultimately, Judy was not the author of the letter, but the handwriting did not definitively link it to Bruce. Detectives struggled to find solid evidence against Bruce and had to make do with their limited resources. To gather more information, Detective Bob decided to speak with Gail again. During their interviews, Gail told the investigators that Bruce had been trying to get her attention for a long time, even before Judy's death. However, Gail, who was married, found Bruce to be annoying and persistent. Despite his advances, she chose to ignore him, hoping he would eventually lose interest and leave her alone. Gail wasn't the only one who had a negative opinion of Bruce. In fact, no one had anything positive to say about him. He often flirted with female colleagues, which led most people to avoid him. His co-workers frequently expressed their frustration, stating that he was hard to work with. Additionally, Gail mentioned that after his wife's death, Bruce boasted about the fortune he would inherit. To Gail, this seemed like a desperate attempt to win her over romantically. This information prompted Detective Bob to investigate further into Moylanen's marriage. The detectives anticipated that Judy and Bruce would have frequent arguments due to his flirtations at work. However, they found no evidence that Judy was aware of Bruce's inappropriate actions towards his female colleagues. They also discovered that the Moylanen family faced financial difficulties in the months leading up to Judy's death, primarily due to Bruce's reckless spending and irresponsibility. Bruce had accumulated significant debt, and his situation worsened to the point where he had to borrow money from one lender to pay another. Throughout their marriage, Judy had managed the financial strain with her income, but she was starting to feel overwhelmed by Bruce's behavior, especially with the added responsibility of caring for their daughter. Detectives found that weeks before Judy's death, Bruce started accumulating insurance policies under her name. Many of these policies included a double indemnity clause, which meant they would pay out double if Judy died accidentally. Detective Bob questioned whether Bruce viewed this as a way to solve both his financial issues and eliminate his wife. Following Judy's death, Bruce was close to receiving a financial payout of $330,000 from her life insurance policies. Investigators uncovered a disturbing fact. In 1991, nearly 14 months before Judy's death, she suffered a serious accident. An 85-pound chimney block fell from a roof where Bruce was working and struck Judy on the head, nearly killing her. Fortunately, she survived but sustained a severe concussion and spent several days in the hospital. Shortly after this incident, a fire broke out in the Moylanen house while Judy was sleeping alone inside. Thankfully, she woke up in time and was able to call the fire department. Judy felt frightened after the two incidents. Many of her friends informed the detectives that Judy had shared her desire to leave her husband, mentioning a feeling that something bad was happening around her. Despite this, she decides to continue the marriage for the sake of their daughter and keeping her feelings hidden from her family. At this point, Detective Bob was nearly convinced that Bruce Moylanen had murdered his wife and staged it as a hunting accident. Unfortunately, they lacked the physical evidence needed to prove it. Desperate for answers, Detective Bob contacted Dan Castle, an expert in metal detectors who had previously assisted law enforcement. Aware that the fatal bullet was still hidden in the woods, Bob requested Dan's help in locating it. Dan diligently used his metal detector every day, but this time he faced a significant challenge and found nothing. After weeks of searching, the snow had completely obscured any signs of the bullet. Despite this setback, Dan remained determined to continue the search. Dan conducted an experiment using a slingshot to replicate the bullet's trajectory and pinpoint its possible landing spot. Fortunately, his method was successful. After searching the area where his marbles bounced off the snow, he discovered the bullet about 80 feet from the maple tree. Although this find was significant, authorities still needed to verify whether it was the bullet that killed Judy or just another one from hunting season. Ray Kenny, a firearm examiner at the Marquette State Police Crime Lab, was assigned to analyze a bullet he had discovered. Within a few days, he identified it as a .30 caliber round that matched wood fibers from the tree it struck. Ray confirmed it was indeed the bullet that hit the tree, but he also uncovered more significant evidence. He found a small pink fiber from the shirt Judy was wearing and some black fibers from her jacket. This provided a crucial connection in the case, marking a significant breakthrough. The investigators next focused on Bruce's notable gun collection. They tested all the rifles that might have fired the fatal bullet and identified 4 potential firearms. At this point, Bruce had no choice but to tell the truth, yet he still chose to lie. He denied owning any of those rifles, but his luck quickly ran out. Judy and Bruce's financial records revealed loan documents listing his gun collection as collateral. Additionally, detectives found an asset list that included a rifle Bruce had failed to disclose. This rifle, which had a scope, matched one of the 4 potential firearms that could have fired the bullet. Investigators eventually concluded that the firearm was likely the murder weapon. They recognized that uncovering the truth was critical at this stage. On April 23, 1993, 5 months into the investigation, Bruce finally agreed to take a polygraph test after previously avoiding it for months. During the initial part of the test, Bruce was calm while answering the investigators' questions. In an effort to elicit the truth, detectives placed a letter from Gail on the table in front of him. This moment marked a turning point in the interview, as Bruce began to share a different story. For the first time, Bruce realized that Gail was secretly working with the police, or he feared that the authorities had finally caught up with him. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears and confessed to murdering his wife. After months of denial, he admitted that on November 29, 1992, he had seen a perfect opportunity to kill her. He explained that during the first 2 times he spotted Judy through the trees, he aimed his gun but couldn't bring himself to pull the trigger. However, on the 3rd occasion, he closed his eyes and fired, resulting in her death. Bruce explained his motive for the murder by saying that Judy had threatened to divorce him and he wanted to avoid the breakup. To rationalize his actions, he described Judy as a harsh person both at work and at home, and he criticized her cooking. Regarding the murder weapon, Bruce stated that he threw the rifle into a nearby river, but the police were unable to find it during their search. He also pointed out an error in the medical examiner's report, which claimed Judy was shot on the left side of her chest. Bruce insisted that she was shot on the right side, with the bullet exiting on the left. This detail was significant in his confession, as it was information that only the killer would know. Bruce Moylanen was quickly arrested and charged with premeditated murder. Despite confessing to the crime, he pleaded not guilty, arguing that the police forced him to confess. Although prosecutors already had substantial evidence against Bruce, they chose to collect more in anticipation of the trial. Investigators examined the chimney block incident. Bruce had initially stated that he accidentally knocked it off with his foot, but they found it was too heavy to fall without being intentionally pushed. The trial primarily favored the prosecution, supported by numerous witnesses and evidence. Bruce remained mostly silent but began to cry when Gale testified. In contrast, the defense had no witnesses to present. Bruce's lawyer, Thomas Castleman, argued that his potential witnesses were too afraid to come forward. He described the investigation as coercive and claimed that the police had extracted Bruce's confession by force. Ultimately, the jury did not believe Bruce's explanation, and on December 15, 1993, they found him guilty. On January 21, 1994, Bruce Moylanen was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole. This decision brought comfort to Judy's family, who had previously questioned his guilt. Judy's brother and sister-in-law, David and Yvonne Blake, took in 5-year-old Elise. This marks the tragic end of a man motivated by greed who believed he could commit the perfect murder. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Nikita Bergenstrom. Nikita Bergenstrom, born on June 13, 1965, in Pori, Finland, had a difficult childhood. His mother found it hard to manage his behavior, particularly at school where he was known to be a bully. He had a very hot temper, and he clashed often with those around him. By the time Nikita reached young adulthood, he was already encountering problems with the law. This included confrontations with the police and a prison sentence at just 19 years old. It was during this period that Nikita met 17-year-old Marita Radulami. Marita also had a miserable life. The two of them committed crimes together, breaking into houses and stealing from stores in Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. The couple's dynamic was tumultuous, with Marita describing Nikita as controlling and violent. After serving time, 22-year-old Nikita was released from a prison in Turku, Finland, on May 1, 1988. Marita had been eagerly awaiting his release. And the couple soon set their sights on traveling to the Mediterranean, a long-held dream of Nikita's. Before they set off on their adventure, the couple took 2 Angora rabbits with them, which Marita was particularly fond of and took special care to keep safe while traveling. On July 3rd, they arrived in Amal, Sweden, near the Finnish border. During the evening, Nikita committed a burglary and stole a shotgun from a house, planning to use it for an armed robbery. After the burglary, they broke into another nearby home and were later seen escaping the scene on a bicycle they had stolen from the homeowner. Stan Nielsen, 40 years old, the father of the family, had his house broken into, and his 15-year-old son, Frederick, chased Nikita into a nearby cemetery after he stole their bicycle. When Stan demanded that Nikita return the bicycle, Nikita refused. Instead, he pulled out a shotgun he had stolen moments earlier and pointed it at Stan. With the shotgun aimed at Stan, Nikita pulled the trigger. And Stan fell to the ground, dying instantly from a single gunshot wound. Frederick, standing beside his father, cried out in horror alongside Marita and begged Nikita not to fire again. However, Nikita disregarded their pleas and fired the shotgun a second time, killing Frederick instantly. Then, Ewer, Stan's wife and Frederick's mother, set out to find the pair. She came across an old car that Nikita and Marita had stolen and were now using as shelter. Ewer approached the car and tapped on the window. Nikita responded violently, grabbing Ewer and killing her with a knife. The exact manner of Ewer's death, whether stabbed or having her throat slit, remains unclear due to conflicting sources. An 11-year-old boy, who was camping in the backyard with his friend, was the only family member to survive the attack, remaining unaware of the horror that unfolded just a short distance away. After committing the murders, Marita and Nikita fled the scene. Their getaway car eventually broke down, leading them to steal a replacement vehicle. Marita was determined to keep the rabbits they had with them as they continued their escape. They discarded the shotgun used in the crime and the clothes they were wearing. The murder weapon was later found by the authorities. As news of the crime spread rapidly across the country, local law enforcement urged anyone with information to come forward and report. Marita felt overwhelmed and expressed her desire to return home to Nikita, but he threatened to harm her rabbits and then herself if she refused to follow his orders. However, it's reported that the trail of rabbit droppings left at each abandoned vehicle the couple used played a significant role in their identification. Because the authorities knew about Marita and Nikita, so they was eventually charged. Their photos were subsequently distributed nationwide. Marita and Nikita managed to evade capture for about a week by sneaking past roadblocks and police patrols. Eventually, they were caught in Denmark, just over a week after the murders took place. During their trial, Nikita refused to confess, but Marita provided a full confession and ultimately incriminated herself. Both Marita and Nikita shifted the blame to each other, but the court found Marita's account to be more credible. A psychiatric evaluation initially deemed Marita and Nikita fit to stand trial. However, a forensic psychiatrist later diagnosed Nikita with an antisocial and narcissistic personality disorder. This condition led to uncontrolled outbursts of aggression and a lack of empathy for others. Notably, this is not the first time Nikita has been in trouble with the law, it was actually his 12th. As a result, Nikita received a life sentence for the 3 murders, with the possibility of parole. In contrast, his accomplice, Marita, was given a 2-year sentence for her role in assault, battery, and theft. She only served 1 year of her sentence before being released. Upon her release from jail, she relocated to a different town and changed her name, starting her life anew. Meanwhile, Nikita was transferred to Finland to serve the remainder of his sentence. Over the years, he has made many escapes in 1991, 1994, 2002, and 2004. In 1994, Nikita took a teacher hostage, and in 2002, he was aided by his wife. Following his recapture, Nikita tried to end his life. He also briefly escaped in 2006, evading capture for 2 days before being caught in Helsinki. Despite his repeated attempts to escape, but Nikita was eventually granted parole in February 2008 after spending 19 years behind bars. That same year, he underwent a name change, shifting from his birth name of Juha Valiaka to Nikita Fokantin. He would go on to change his name one more time in 2013, adopting the surname Bergenström and becoming Nikita Bergenström. It was 2 months after his release, Nikita was arrested again for violating his parole terms. The reasons behind his rearrest included drunk driving, operating a vehicle without a license, and running a taxi service without a license. He later was released in February 2009. After 2009, Nikita's life became unstable of a blur, as he apparently repeatedly found himself in and out of prison due to various minor offenses. In 2011, he managed to escape from prison once more. 3 years later, in 2014, Nikita was allegedly involved in a violent fight with 2 inmates, who were possibly instructed or bribed by a prison guard. However, an investigation did not find sufficient evidence to confirm this. Nikita continued his pattern of escape and rearrest. He fled prison again in 2015 and resurfaced in 2018, receiving an 80-day prison sentence for drunk driving. Currently, his exact location remains unknown, but it appears Nikita is no longer incarcerated. Nikita's past is filled with petty crimes, but what drove him to commit 3 murders in one night remains unclear. The severity of his crimes on July 3, 1988, is particularly disturbing. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Charlene Gallego. Charlene Gallego, born Charlene William, born on October 10, 1956, into a middle-class family. Parents are Mercedes and Charles. As the only child in the family, she was always pampered by her parents because of their utmost love. She excelled in school, being a clever but shy student, and showed promise as a talented violinist. However, her life took a turn for the worse during her teenage years, plagued by issues with substance abuse, drinking, and a gambling habit. By the age of 21, Charlene had been through 2 marriages and divorces and was running her own flower and glassware boutique, set up with her parents' help. She was also pursuing further education at the university. Charlene met Gerald in Sacramento, California, on September 10, 1977, just before her 21st birthday. Gerald, who was born in July 1946, was 10 years Charlene's senior and had an extensive history of crime. His upbringing was marked by instability. With his mother working as a sex worker and having multiple abusive partners, while his father, also a career criminal, was estranged from the family. Gerald's father was ultimately executed in Mississippi's gas chamber for killing 2 police officers during a prison escape. Gerald began his life of crime at a young age. By age 6, he had committed burglary and other sex crimes. At 12 years old, he was charged with lewd and lascivious acts for assaulting a 6-year-old girl. When he met Charlene, Gerald had amassed 23 arrests and had served time in prison for robbery. He had also been convicted of various other charges, including rape, incest, vehicle theft, and assaults with a deadly weapon. Gerald's first marriage was to a 21-year-old woman when he was 16. They had a daughter, Krista, who would later file charges against her father for sexual abuse in 1978. Gerald went on to marry several more times, but his relationships were short-lived due to his violent and abusive behavior. Gerald met Charlene, and they quickly formed a connection, moving in together within a week. However, Charlene soon discovered Gerald's controlling, manipulative nature. Their sex life was initially healthy, but it became a cause for concern when Gerald revealed he struggled with becoming aroused in consensual relationships. Gerald also admitted to having fantasies about non-consensual partners, which he referred to as sex slaves. To address this issue, the couple tried using role-playing, but unfortunately, this approach did not work as they had hoped. Eventually, Gerald began to devise a plan. At the time of the first murder, his girlfriend Charlene was 2 months pregnant, but she later had an abortion because Gerald did not want to be a father again. On September 11, 1978, 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Rhonda Sheff and 16-year-old Kippy Vort disappeared from the Country Club Plaza shopping center in Sacramento. Charlene lured them into their 1973 Dodge van by offering marijuana. The girls climbed into the back of the van, where Gerald was waiting. He threatened them with a .25 caliber pistol, tied them up, and ordered Charlene to drive toward the Sierra Nevada mountains. As they went further and left the residential area, he told Charlene to stop in a remote area. He then took the girls away one at a time and sexually assaulted them. After returning to the van, Gerald told Charlene to drive to her friend's house to create an alibi, also added that she should go back by Oldsmobile. Charlene followed his instructions, and when she came back, she found Kippy and Rhonda in the van, who were then forced into the back of the vehicle. On their way back to Sacramento, Gerald had the car pulled over. He attacked both girls, knocking them unconscious with a tire iron, and then shot them in the head. Gerald and Charlene left the bodies behind and drove away. Charlene and Gerald chose to stay out of sight for a while, so they left California and temporarily moved to Reno, Nevada. Charlene's parents advised her to take her cousin's birth certificates to help Gerald get the necessary documents for work. Gerald also obtained a driver's license under the name Stephen Fail. While in Reno, the couple found regular jobs and led a normal life. They even got married during this period, but the time they do not commit a crime is only temporary. On June 24, 1979, Gerald and Charlene went to the Washoe County Fair. 14 years old, Brenda Judd and 13 years old Sandra Colley were heading home when Charlene approached them as they were leaving the fairgrounds. She asked if they would help her distribute leaflets and promised to pay them. The girls agreed and followed Charlene to her van to get more leaflets. Both girls got into the van, and shortly after, Gerald, who had been watching from a distance, came up to the vehicle. He was carrying a weapon and threatened the girls before tying them up. He then instructed Charlene to drive towards I-80 but made a stop at a hardware store first, where he picked up a hammer and a shovel. Then Charlene drove the vehicle into the hills. In the back of the van, the two young girls, Brenda and Sandra, were assaulted. Similar to the previous incident, Gerald and Charlene parked in a remote area, where they let Brenda and Sandra out one at a time before killing them. Gerald then buried their bodies using a shovel he had recently bought. The next day, Charlene cleaned the van to eliminate any forensic evidence left by the victims. Gerald kept the shovel and hammer he had used, and a few months later, Gerald and Charlene returned to Sacramento. After returning to California, Gerald was eager to find another victim. They decided on the Sunrise Mall in Citrus Heights, about 20 minutes outside of Sacramento, as their next target. On April 24, 1980, they chose two 17-year-old girls, Stacy Redican and Karen Twix. Similar to their previous victims, Stacy and Karen were lured into the back of the van with the promise of drugs. Gerald, armed with a .357 Magnum, threatened and tied them up. Afterward, Stacy and Karen were taken east on I-80 and sexually assaulted during the drive. Gerald instructed Charlene to take them to Limerick Canyon, where both girls were murdered. On their way home, Charlene threw Gerald's hammer out the window. Around the same time, Charlene became pregnant again. This time, Gerald was pleased with the news, and they decided to keep the child. While on vacation in Oregon on July 7, 1980, Gerald and Charlene committed another crime. While driving on a highway, they saw 21-year-old Linda Aguila, who was pregnant and walking home from shopping. They offered her a ride, which she accepted. Charlene drove while Gerald sexually assaulted Linda in the back of the van. After finding a place to stop, Charlene got out and wandered around until Gerald was done. In a secluded area, he took Linda away from the van, hit her on the head with a rock, and strangled her to death. Linda's body was discovered later that month in a shallow grave outside Gold Beach, Oregon. Although a witness saw Linda enter an unidentified van, authorities suspected her abusive boyfriend might have been behind the crime. 9 days later, Gerald and Charlene spent the evening at the Sail Inn Bar in West Sacramento. After the bar closed, they waited for the bartender in the parking lot, a young woman named Virginia Muchel, because Gerald was interested in her. When Virginia left work, Gerald forced her into the van at gunpoint. Not like previous times, Gerald and Charlene drove straight home instead of to a deserted area. While Gerald sexually invaded Virginia, Charlene stayed inside their house. Afterward, they drove away, and Gerald strangled Virginia. They dumped her body outside Clarksburg, where it was later discovered by law enforcement. Regular customers at the Sail Inn told investigators about Gerald and Charlene, who had been there the night before. Authorities were able to track them down, and Gerald admitted they were at the bar but claimed they had no knowledge of what happened to Virginia. Charlene said she and Gerald had gone fishing that day. Investigators found fishing line that had been used to tie Virginia's hands. But this evidence wasn't enough to file charges, causing the case to stall. Following this, Gerald became more violent and angry, leading to he and Charlene's separation. She then moved in with her parents. During this period, Gerald left town and started a relationship with another woman. However, by early November, he returned to Sacramento and asked to meet Charlene. She agreed, and on November 1st, they borrowed Charlene's parents' Oldsmobile and went to a bar. At the bar, Gerald expressed his desire to find another slave, and they then drove to the Arden Fair shopping center. Charlene was stunned when her husband exited the vehicle and came back with 2 university students, Craig Miller and Mary Sowers. They quietly got into the car as Gerald aimed a gun at them. Just as they were about to drive off, a friend of Craig noticed them and asked what was happening. Without thinking, Charlene drove out of her parking spot and sped away. Meanwhile, Craig's friend quickly noted the license plate numbers and reported the situation to the police. Charlene drove Craig and Mary into El Dorado County until Gerald told her to stop. He then forced Craig out of the car and shot him 3 times in the head. When returning to Oldsmobile, Gerald had Charlene drive them to his home, where he took Mary into the bedroom and sexually assaulted her. Later, Charlene drove them to a secluded area, where Mary was killed. The next day, when Gerald and Charlene returned to Charlene's parents' house, they found out that the police were already informed about the situation. Gerald left Charlene to face the police alone. Charlene told investigators that she and Charlene had gone to a movie in his red Triumph, but investigators were informed that the car had not moved all night. She then claimed she couldn't remember the details because she had been drinking. Meanwhile, Gerald decided he needed to move Craig's body, but it had already been discovered near Bass Lake, California. Likely in a panic, Gerald and Charlene decided to flee the state. They drove to Reno, abandoned their car, and took a bus to Salt Lake City, Utah. Back in Sacramento, Craig's friend identified Gerald from a photo taken, and Charlene's parents confirmed their son-in-law's identity, Gerald. Detectives also found that the bullets recovered from Craig's body matched those that Gerald had fired into the ceiling at his workplace. In Utah, Charlene contacted her parents for money, and they sent her money, Mercedes and Charles. Gerald and Charlene then moved to Denver, Colorado, and later to Omaha, Nebraska, where they her parents for more money. They agreed to help again but informed the FBI about the situation. The FBI was waiting for the couple at a Western Union office, where they were arrested without any issues. After being returned to California, both Gerald and Charlene pleaded not guilty. Charlene's lawyers successfully negotiated a plea deal for her. By pleading guilty to the first-degree murders of Craig, Mary, and providing testimony against Gerald, she would receive a prison sentence of just 16.5 years. avoiding the death penalty. Charlene agreed to this deal and shared everything she knew with law enforcement. In Nevada, she also pleaded guilty to the second-degree murders of Karen and Stacy through a similar arrangement. Although California sought to overturn Charlene's plea bargain due to dissatisfaction with sentence, the charges related to the murders of Craig and Mary were dropped entirely in 1983. During her testimony, Charlene stated that she participated in the crimes because she was afraid of Gerald, describing him as violent and abusive. She claimed that he took all the money she earned and manipulated her whenever she expressed dissatisfaction. Meanwhile, Gerald tried to discredit Charlene by revealing her affair with a man other. He also labeled her as a drug addict. Gerald took the stand and gave testimony, but he revealed many inconsistencies in his testimony. He ultimately urged the jury to trust him, but they were not persuaded. As a result, Gerald Gallego was sentenced to death for the murders of Craig Miller and Mary Sowers, which occurred on June 21, 1983. He was also found guilty of the murders of Karen Twiggs and Stacy Redican. While the remains of Brenda and Sandra were discovered in Lassen County, California, he was not tried for those deaths. Gerald maintained his innocence throughout and spent a quiet life in prison until he died from cancer in 2002 at the age of 56, while still awaiting execution. In July 1997, Charlene was released from prison. While incarcerated, she gave birth to her son, also named Gerald, who was raised by her parents. Tragically, he later died while serving in the military. After her release, Charlene chose not to return to Sacramento and started using her maiden name. She has reportedly returned to the area under the name Mary Martinez and currently works for In Charity. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Richard Beasley. Richard Beasley, born in 1959, was from Akron, Ohio. He was mainly raised by his mother, who worked as an office worker. After finishing school, Richard became a mechanic. He had a criminal history that included a 5-year prison sentence in Texas for burglary, followed by 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio under a new identity and tried to create a positive image by pretending to be a pastor and attending church regularly. During this time, he developed a drug addiction. Eventually, after being involved in a car accident, he stopped working and lost his source of income. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone Richard knew from the motorcycle network. Richard decided to mentor Brogan, discussing the value of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his moral conversations, Richard was actually living a double life. He had found an apartment near the road, where he sought search for girls in need, homeless people, and drug addicts for trafficking. The police eventually discovered his actions, forcing Richard to change his identity once more. As a result, he shifted his focus to exploit homeless and unemployed individuals, intending to steal their money and personal information. Noble County, located in southeastern Ohio, is a sparsely populated area characterized by vast, deserted forests. It was here that Scott Davis, a 48-year-old man, relocated from South Carolina after having worked in the state for about 15 years. To seeking better opportunities, Scott made the move to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. Scott came across a job posting on Craigslist that caught his attention. The job description read, "Simply care for a 688-acre property and raise cattle." The position pays $1,300 a week and have the opportunity to live a beautiful 2-bedroom mobile home. Although older and single individuals are preferred, but all qualified individuals will be considered. This is a short-term opportunity, so call now to apply. The benefits highlighted in the listing appealed to Scott, who was desperate for a job, and he decided to contact the employer early. After Scott heard back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the job ad, he was quickly accepted for the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta. At the restaurant, Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi, who both appeared to be genuine farmers. Their trustworthy appearance made Scott feel at ease. Then, Richard conducted an initial interview and asked Scott to join him in the car to visit the job site. They drove to a remote forest area with no cell phone reception. Suddenly, Richard said to Brogan, who was driving, that can they stop here? He need to grab some equipment for the farm, near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott got out of the car. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest, with Richard following behind Scott. As they walked, Scott heard a clicking sound behind him, followed by some mumbling. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood he was the target next in line. Just as Richard was about to pull the trigger, Scott swiftly pushed the gun away, and the bullet struck his elbow instead. Scott then took off running, and Richard chased him, gunfire ringing in his ears, with bullets whizzing past and the sound of breaking trees and branches behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the barrel of the revolver aimed at him. Stunned and terrified, he froze momentarily before he sprinted away. Scott was lost and unfamiliar with his surroundings, but that didn't matter to him. All that mattered was making his escape. Richard, the gunman, shot at him as he fled, hitting him in the arm and making him fall. Just as Richard was about to take another shot, Scott, despite his injury, got back on his feet and ran, with blood pouring from his wounded arm. Hoping to escape the gunfire, Scott hurried to his right and slipped between two large trees. He started descending a small, slippery slope, almost losing his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. As he slid down, he flailed his arms to keep his balance, unaware of the pain from his gunshot wound. He knew he couldn't afford to fall. If he did, his chances of survival would vanish. Then, he began to run once more. He heard the gunfire of the revolver right behind him for the second time. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away, causing a rush of air. "Oh God, he's not going to let me live," he thought again. Scott took refuge in a thicket of brambles and underbrush, ignoring the thorns and hooks that tore at his skin, leaving a trail of blood behind him. His only focus was to escape the maniac with the gun, Richard. Another gunshot echoed, startling him and led him to run even faster. His heart raced, his ears buzzed from the noise. And he shook from the sweat that drenched him. When Scott finally broke free from the thick undergrowth, he paused briefly. He felt disoriented, unsure of his next steps. All around him was dense vegetation, trees, bushes, and bare branches, and the murderer was still pursuing him. He could hear the sounds of someone crashing through the brush he had just escaped, and he realized he couldn't afford to stop. He needed to continue running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard his attacker getting closer, followed by the sound of a gunshot. He realized he was nearing his end, and the thought filled him with dread. He sprinted faster, but stumbled and fell, sweat stinging his eyes and obscuring his vision. His head spun, and all he could hear was a deafening ringing in his ears. Then, he struggled to keep running. His heart raced as if it would explode from his chest, and he finally stopped. He spotted a small ditch surrounded by thick plants and scattered fallen branches. He quickly ducked behind a large tree, straining to listen for the gunman. Scott could sense the fear radiating from himself as he groaned softly. He noticed that his arm was bleeding heavily, yet he didn't feel any pain at that moment. As his heartbeat began to stabilize, his hearing returned to normal. He could hear dogs barking in the distance and crows cawing from nearby trees. He listened carefully, hoping to detect if anyone was following or searching for him, but the forest was unusually quiet. Hiding there, he felt a mix of shock, pain, and trembling fear. Eventually, he became convinced that he had escaped his attacker, and he felt immense relief. Even after he was certain the murderer was leave, Scott needed 7 more hours to feel safe enough to seek help. When he found the chance to escape, he located a house and called the police. Noble County detectives arrived about 15 minutes later, and Scott told the officer everything, tell about Richard and the chase. Remarkably, he survived an 8-hour pursuit. Unfortunately, not all victims were as fortunate. Scott wasn't the first person to respond to that job posting. In fact, hundreds of people had applied and been accepted over the months before Scott's incident. After Scott escaped a life-threatening situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he had met Richard and Brogan. However, they faced a setback. A fire in the surveillance room the night before had damaged the recordings, making recovery difficult and time-consuming. Meanwhile, the media reported on a man who posted fake job ads on Craigslist to lure victims into the woods, where he killed them. The shocking story has garnered widespread attention of many. In August 2011, 56-year-old Ralph Geiger was experiencing a difficult period in his life. He was unemployed and living in a homeless shelter in Akron, Ohio. After losing his job, he faced significant challenges. Ralph had graduated high school in the 1970s and moved to California, where he worked with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and successfully started his own business, where he was able to hire employees and make a living by renovating homes and taking on various jobs. However, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he could no longer afford his rent, leading to his move into a homeless shelter. He lost his apartment and faced many hardships. Ralph was a lifelong bachelor, which meant he didn't have to worry about supporting a wife and children. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who is 26 and considers him like a father, often mentioned this about him. They developed a strong bond after he hired her to help clean his house many years ago. Ralph was known for his willingness to assist friends. In the summer of 2011, he visited the library every day to search for job opportunities. By the end of July, he excitedly told Summer he had landed a great job managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job not only provided him with a free mobile home but also a salary of $300 a week. Summer was thrilled for Ralph, believing he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph was happy and saw the job as an opportunity to regain his independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and said him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without hearing from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to reach him multiple times on his mobile phone, but each time, she only got his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. When she called the number again, someone else answered, indicating that Ralph's number had been reassigned. Despite her worries about Ralph, Summer chose not to report him missing, as she wasn't certain he was actually gone. Ralph had disappeared in the past but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauly, who have had a hard time in recent years. His divorce 2 years earlier had left him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting over in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After the divorce, David found comfort in using the computer and often browsed the web. One night in October 2011, he came across a Craigslist ad that piqued his interest. He discovered a job advertisement in the Help Wanted section for a farm caretaker position on a 688-acre farm located in rural Ohio. The job pays $1,300 a week and includes free use of a trailer on the property. Curious and excited about this opportunity, David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, thought that taking a break from the city would be a significant change. Rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, felt like a promising option for the change he desired. The fact that he would have a free place to stay would also help him save money. David decided to respond to the advertisement and soon received a reply. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, frequently communicated with him. On October 22, 2011, she received a call from him while he was staying Red Roof Inn, Parkersburg, West Virginia, on his way to Ohio. David was very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He spoke about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life there. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David talked for a bit, with Deborah wishing her younger brother good luck and reminding him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, they had no idea it would be their last conversation. David's sister, unable to reach him for some time, saw news reports and contacted the police. They quickly realized that David was yet another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest where Richard had tried to murder Scott. After searching for 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and nearby, they discovered a grave that had been dug in advance for Scott. A K-9 unit was called in, and soon after, they noticed something unusual. They uncovered another body buried in the damp soil, which had been shot in the back of the head. This body was identified as David Pauly. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave containing an unidentified body. The sheriff's office in Noble County requested assistance from the FBI to track down the person who had posted a job advertisement related to the case. They needed the FBI to trace the poster using the IP address and the details of the advertisement. It became apparent that the advertiser was searching for a particular individual, someone who could vanish without attracting much attention or concern. During the interview, Richard would not hire applicants mentioned they were married or had combat or martial arts skills. He was specifically seeking older men for the position. Additionally, he completely ignored responses from women who applied. The candidates who met his criteria were Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis. Another suitable applicant was Timothy Kern, who is 47 years old. Timothy Kern was a divorced father and living away from his 3 sons. To take a job in Ohio, he had to leave his children at home. He responded to a job advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after an incident involving Scott Davis. On November 12th, Timothy visited his sons to say goodbye before moving to Ohio. After he left, there was no further communication from him, which triggered the start of an investigation into his disappearance. About 2 weeks later, the FBI found that the IP address of the person who posted the advertisement was linked to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. He claimed he had not posted any ads on Craigslist and did not know anyone named Richard, but he did mention that a man had rented a room in his house. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner and recognized a man named Richard Beasley, who is a local from Noble. When Joe viewed the footage, he identified the man, but Richard had previously introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. Police had no idea they had found Ralph Geiger, Richard Beasley's first victim, buried in an unmarked grave. They also found Brogan Rafferty, Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken into custody. Brogan agreed to share all the details of Richard's actions and to testify in court in exchange for a lighter sentence. He was also present when Richard brought Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, where Richard later lured David and Scott. Brogan wrote a report of the incident and said that they led Ralph into the woods on a hot summer night. He recalled hearing a loud noise and then going back to the car to get a shovel. When he returned, Ralph was still there, and Richard had thrown Ralph's clothes into a trash bag along with some personal belongings. Brogan also described digging a hole that was waist-high and probably about 4 feet wide. They struggled to place Ralph's body in it and sprinkled lime over him as a baptismal ritual. After Richard stole Ralph Geiger's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He then found a job and took pleasure in his actions. Many victims arrived with most of their belongings in their cars, which Richard later sold. Scott Davis informed Richard that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview, and Richard was excited about that. The last victim of Richard was Timothy Kern. At 47 years old, he faced similar job struggles as the other victims. While looking for a new job, he found a promising opportunity that required him to relocate. However, Timothy was reluctant to move away from his children. Since his divorce in 1997, he had remained close to his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. He was not only a dedicated father but also an enthusiastic baseball coach, always making time for his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their relationships through social media, especially Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about a unique job opportunity managing a 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing that covered rent and utilities, and a generous weekly salary. His only worry was the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was concerned about being away from his family, the job was too great. He planned to move on Sunday, feeling a sense of regret about leaving his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He cherished the time he spent with his sons before departing the next morning. One of his sons received a message from he, expressing his love, but no one realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different site behind an abandoned shopping center in a can. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were not initially aware of Richard's address, but they eventually apprehended him. Unbeknownst to Richard, Joe, his landlord, had talked to the police, which led them to track Richard's IP address. As a result, Richard contacted Joe both by phone and through messages, which allowed the police to locate him. Richard was arrested on November 16, just 3 days after he killed Timothy. He faced charges for the murders of Ralph, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with various other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Rafferty were put on trial in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan was offered a plea deal in which he would receive leniency if he provided information about Richard Beasley. However, he decided to reject the offer. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of aggravated murder. Even though Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to deny Richard's involvement when the key witness and one of the victims, Scott, agreed to testify. There was also a significant amount of evidence at the crime scene, including the victim's personal belongings and identification found at Richard's home. Although he tried to deny it, all the evidence proved him guilty. Richard's trial took place later that year, and he was sentenced to death. He was found guilty of aggravated murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Police Court for resentencing, but the verdict did not change. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard participated in his sentencing via video link from the Chilo Correctional Institution. He was seated in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks. Richard's attorney, argued against imposing multiple consecutive sentences on someone who was already facing the death penalty, suggesting it was unnecessary. However, Summit County Prosecutor Jacket Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should stay the same. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common Court supported the prosecutor's stance, stating that imposing multiple consecutive sentences was necessary to accurately represent Richard's criminal behavior. During the trial, Richard asked if he could get back a Celtic cross that had been seized during the investigation. He explained that the necklace had been in his family for generations and he wanted to give it to his newly married daughter. He insisted it was not related to the case, and it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It's striking that a man convicted of murdering many innocent people would present himself as a loving father. This raises questions about whether his behavior towards his daughter was truly genuine or simply a strategy to appear compassionate to the jury. Richard's mother was there, convinced of his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, Scott, and the confession of his accomplice who testified in court, Richard had to accept the consequences of his actions. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother did not speak further. Richard appealed the verdict but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has continuously claimed he is innocent, but no one believes him. He is currently at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard was close to evading capture, but his gun jammed, giving Scott the chance to escape. If Scott hadn't escaped and reported the incident, the serial killer in the woods might not have been discovered, leading to more victims. The situation began with an online job ad that the victims accepted without question.